Chapter 570. Everyone had their own fate. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't the only one who had a cluster of providence. The fate cluster was something that was scattered in the universe after the collapse of the heavenly way of fate. It was something that was attached to all living beings. In fact, all living beings had their own fate. It was just that it did not appear in the form of a fate cluster. But after a person died, this invisible fate would leave the body. Most of it would return to nature, to the heavenly way, but a small part would be transferred to the person who did the harm. It would cause karma, and also cause the transfer of fate. It was also a kind of balance. Lu Xiaoyi could not see karma, but after his fate intercepting had been baptized by nature, he could vaguely identify the destination of this ownerless fate. This was what he had learned about the heavenly way of fate after he was on Whirling Star. It was very shallow and vague, but it could be used to identify the general direction. In other words, by looking at who the ownerless fate drifted to, it would show who did it. The heavenly way of fate was unfathomable. Lu Xiaoyi had the enlightenment in the peacock plume space, and he had dealt with that mysterious force many times, which allowed him to figure out some of his own things. The battle in the sky was very fierce, but the funny thing was that so far, no one had died, not even seriously injured. Only a few people had minor injuries. Those who fought were fine, but those who tried to stop the fight died. This was also a strange story. Very sad? Very unwilling? Want to go up and take revenge? He asked casually as he watched. He really wanted to know the fighting level of the cultivators in the Azure Sky big world. To be honest, it was very good. Compared with the 5-ring cultivators of the same realm, they were not much weaker. Of course I am sad, of course I am unwilling. But I don't want to go up and take revenge. I can't do it now. The ice guest answered honestly. You must be thinking that since the martial uncle of the sect is here, the responsibility of taking revenge will fall on the martial uncle's head. It's not wrong to think like this, but it's irresponsible. Your master and I are from the same sect, so of course I have the responsibility. But this responsibility is based on the interests of the sect. It doesn't involve the Taoist heart. Your master and I have never met before, and we don't have any personal feelings for each other. However, we can't compare to the time you spend with each other. Therefore, only your vengeance comes from the bottom of your heart, and it will affect your future cultivation. Therefore, don't easily push your responsibility onto others. Do you understand what I'm saying? The few Foundation establishment cultivators nodded silently. There was a reason why they hadn't been selected and sent to the 5th ring. Either their aptitude and potential were obviously insufficient, or they hadn't been in the Foundation establishment stage for long enough, or they had a huge flaw in their state of mind. They lacked the indomitable spirit of a swordsman. The ice guest lacked tenacity in spirit and fearlessness in momentum. In reality, he followed his master's every step and did not have his own opinions. Therefore, even if his cultivation had reached the late stage of Foundation establishment, and he had a certain talent for cultivation, he was still judged as a defective product and did not have the qualification to go to the 5th ring. This was the difference between the sword vein and the Dharma vein. The sword vein valued the spirit more. If a cultivator like the ice guest was in the 3 pure ones, he would have been sent to the 5th ring long ago. It's inevitable to be sad when you lose your family and master for the first time. But you have to get over it early and think about what you can do for your master. Lu Xiao usually didn't talk so much, and he even believed that actions were better than words in battle. However, he had just come to Green Sky Sect, so he needed to adapt and plan for the future. On one hand, he needed to roughly understand the level of battle here. On the other hand, he had no family in Green Sky Sect, so he was like a blind man. He needed a few pairs of eyes and ears to help him. Those who were above him couldn't fit in quickly, so he had to think about these young cultivators. It was just the right time for him to stop drinking milk. At this time, appropriate concern could easily capture people's hearts. Thank you for your concern, uncle. I can bear it. This is not the first time I've lost my family. In fact, my previous master also passed away in battle. I was there at that time. The ice guest was very honest. He couldn't hide these things. Lu Xiaoyi laughed awkwardly. How could he have experience in this kind of thing? The ice guest's eyes were shining. He clenched his fists to show his determination. I will definitely turn my grief into strength. I will worship a good master and take revenge. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Worship again? Aren't you afraid of losing the green sky sword vein? After watching for so long, from the ice guest's master's intervention, to the time when he was attacked and seriously injured, to the time when he sent out the green bird's message, Lu Xiaoyi rushed over thousands of miles to help, and still managed to catch up with the end of the fight. It could be seen that the fight between cultivators of Dharma was very slow. Or maybe they didn't even want to fight to the death, but just wanted to show their strength here. On the ground, there were many foundation establishment cultivators of various sections. In the sky, there were masters of Jin Dan. They were fighting for the control of the future of the Ji Ma Peninsula. They were fighting for the help of this precious land for the future of their sections. The only exception was the sea beasts of the South Sea. They were fighting for the right to trade equally with human beings. They set up a market on the Ji Ma Peninsula, but they didn't want to occupy the Ji Ma Peninsula. There was no precedent of sea beasts occupying a human port. Those who were not of the same race were bound to have different intentions. This kind of concept existed in the concept of human cultivators, and it was hard to change. Uncle, don't we need to stop them? Frost felt that this strange uncle was a little indecisive. The Xianyuan people were killed, but he was still watching. Shouldn't he do something to show his existence? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The way to deal with problems actually depended on one's own strength. The reason why Frost Guest's master went to stop them was that he knew that if he let them go, he couldn't control the development of the situation. However, Lu Xiaoyi could watch them fight each other, because he knew that he had the ability to change the situation when it went bad. Different strengths determined different ways of dealing with things. No one was right or wrong. What was wrong was that one's strength was not enough to deal with the trouble. No need! They are just fighting for us to see. They just want to test the attitude of Xianyuan on the Ji Ma Peninsula, Lu Xiaoyi said very vaguely. In fact, the meaning behind his words was that Frost Guest's master didn't see it clearly enough. He was eager to take the responsibility, which led to a fatal disaster. The battle in the sky gradually came to an end. It was almost the end of the splendid and colorful unique techniques. They were showing their strength. This was the reality of the world of cultivation. It was to tell other competitors, and also to tell Xianyuan about their abilities and attitudes. If there wasn't a result that could be accepted by all parties, there wouldn't be such a battle. Then, it would be a real life and death battle. The battle between magic cultivators was always full of a sense of ceremony. In this regard, it was far less direct than the battle between five-ring cultivators. Now, since another Xianyuan Jin Dan was here, there was no need to continue acting. Chapter 571. The 12 Jin Dan descended slowly and saluted from afar. One of them spoke apologetically. We were fighting for our own interests, but fellow Taoist Yu Xing was implicated. We feel really uneasy. At that time, spells were flying everywhere and the situation was unclear. We are willing to take responsibility for the accidental injuries. Please tell us what to do. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at him. This was Taoist Wei Yan from Jijian Temple. He had the demeanor of an immortal and had the bearing of an orthodox Taoist. Accidental injuries are common among cultivators of our generation. Without this concept, how can we be cultivators? Why don't we go back and be peacekeepers? You don't have to take it to heart. Our Xianyuan is a great sect and we still have this bit of magnanimity. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and waved his hand. Xianyuan intends to transfer the Ji Ma Peninsula to benefit the cultivators of the northern region. This is the truth. I came here with the authorization of my elders and have the responsibility to make a decision. I'm not here to blame you. Then, have you decided who is the winner and loser? Forgive me for my poor eyesight. I came in a hurry and did not see the truth of the matter. Why don't you say it yourself? The Jin Dan were very surprised when they heard this. Xianyuan agreed to let the various powers fight over the Ji-Ma Peninsula. This was only a preliminary intention. They were also testing Xuanyuan's bottom line. What were their preferences? What were their conditions? As for Yu Xing's death, it was not a big deal in the cultivation world. Which day did not have people dying in the cultivation world? If Xianyuan had casualties, the other sects would have even more. Shui Shan, which had always been known for its ruthlessness, would never make a big fuss over the death of a disciple. They thought that this was a way to train their swordsmen. At most, the dead swordsman's friends would come to seek justice. But in this kind of chaotic battle, who would know who was the culprit? You could deal with one person, but you could not deal with an entire sect, even if the sect's strength was far inferior to Xuanyuan's. Therefore, there was a high probability that the matter would be left unsettled. This was the reason why Yu Xing died unjustly. But now, this unfamiliar Jin Dan had boasted that he could decide the ownership of the Ji-Ma Peninsula. This surprised them. They thought that this matter would take a long time, but they didn't expect Xianyuan to be so straightforward. Fellow Taoist, may I ask for your name? Taoist Wei Yan was very cautious. Jin Dan cultivator wouldn't lie about such a promise in front of so many people, but he still needed to confirm it. Lu Xiaoyi was very polite. Cigarette butt! For the time being, I will take over the affairs of the Ji-Ma Peninsula. Please take care of me. Xuanyuan's rule over the northern region could not be completely carried out by Xuanyuan's own swordsman. The swordsman was not cut out for this job. Most of them controlled the entire region through the various large and small sects scattered throughout the northern region. There was a limit to high pressure, and it was also undesirable. This was a governing philosophy that even the mortal world's imperial court could understand. It also gave the sects below them the soil to breed their ambitions. In this fertile soil, ambitions fermented. When they fermented to a certain extent and developed into practical action, they would shake the control of the upper echelons. Then, there would be a bloody suppression, or the overthrow of the rebels. The rule would be maintained, or another ruler would appear, and the next cycle would begin. Just like the various sects now, they were in the process of changing from ambition to practical action. More often than not, they were testing the waters. This cycle had been going on for tens of thousands of years. Just based on the time, Xuanyuan's control was quite effective. But this could not stop the trend of cultivation history. No one could do it. The sword vein could not do it, and neither could the Dharma vein. Taoism could not do it, and neither could Buddhism. Everyone understood. Of course, they were very familiar with Xuanyuan's seniority. The Yan generation was less than 300 years old, and was considered a very young existence in Jin Dan. They did not know why Xianyuan had sent such a young man to handle this matter. They had the confidence to cause trouble. Firstly, they felt that they were not at a disadvantage when compared to Xianyuan and Jin Dan. Secondly, they had control over the surrounding territories of the Ji-Ma Peninsula. In their opinion, why would Xianyuan need to deploy a large number of people from the fifth ring to a place as small as the Ji-Ma Peninsula? The Jin Dan crowd felt that this was a little sudden. Since when did they have a clear winner and loser? They were purely acting here, and conveniently killed a rash swordsman who had obstructed them. This time, it was Chu Shui from the Narcissus sect who spoke. The strength of our sects is similar, and it is difficult to determine who is better. I wonder who is more suitable in the eyes of Xuanyuan's superior? This was also a test. These sects were not fools. There was no reason for them to fight to the death before Xianyuan announced the rules. The last one who won miserably might not even satisfy Xianyuan. They needed a clear rule that they could follow. In the northern domain, Xianyuan could not make detailed rules because the place was too big. They could not control every mountain and every city. However, the Ji-Ma Peninsula was different. It was small enough. To put it bluntly, it was the site of the old mountain gate of the Surging Waves Pavilion. People were interested in it because of the unspeakable things that had been proven by the Surging Waves Pavilion for tens of thousands of years. The location of the mountain gate was very important, and it could not be chosen casually. Lu Xiaoyu was also in a difficult position. The four forces were all around the Ji-Ma Peninsula. One of them was on the sea, and the other three were on the land. They surrounded the Ji-Ma Peninsula so tightly that even a needle could not be inserted, and water could not be splashed in. It was also impossible to lead other forces in. If he really went to find them, he would definitely be resisted by the four forces. Because of the terrain, he could only choose between the four forces. Thus, he muttered, "Everyone's Tao skills are profound, and your foundations are profound. Each of you has your own advantages. I am also in a difficult position. Since this is a matter of the cultivation world, of course, strength is the most important thing. I can see that everyone's Tao skills are profound and unfathomable. As a person from the sword vein, I can only watch the show. In fact, I don't know much about the wonders of it. How about this? In order to accurately measure everyone's strength, why don't I use my sword, and everyone can try to receive it? The difference in strength will be known when the sword is used. This is also a first-hand measure. In the end, the Ji-Ma Peninsula will belong to whoever performs the best under the sword attack. What do you think?" The Jin Dan crowd laughed. They were all old foxes who had lived for hundreds of years. How could they not know the true meaning of this swordsman's words? Although it was said to measure the difference in strength with one's sword, the true meaning behind it was nothing more than to find out who killed Yu Xing. Did he think they were fools? But they still wouldn't refuse, because they had their own strength. How could they let someone test their strength with one sword attack? With Su Anyuan's ability to use external swords, even if he used 10 or 100 swords, he wouldn't be able to find out anything. Because Yu Xing's death wasn't the work of one person, but of 3. How could they test it? Moreover, this cigarette butt had arrogantly said that he would decide who would belong to him after the test. They wanted to see who he would choose after the test. If he didn't choose well, it would be a group attack. The Lone Mountain Sect's head Horn's eyes flashed fiercely. "Fellow Taoist, are you serious? You aren't here to make fun of us, are you?" Lu Xiai sighed. "What right does this cigarette butt have to dare to make fun of you swordsmen? Firstly, it's a conclusion. Secondly, it's a test to see how far I can go after practicing the sword for hundreds of years. If I accidentally hurt you, please forgive me." Everyone's divine senses intertwined, and they all agreed. "In that case, we would like to experience Su Anyuan's invincible swordsmanship." Chapter 572. Every cultivator had their own rules when it came to fights of magical powers. The basis of the fights were their realms, their roots, their cultivation, and their special techniques. The trial that Lu Xiaoyu proposed was the most peaceful and friendly one. He would attack with his sword while the rest would defend themselves. They would see how they performed in defense, and see who was more relaxed, who could break through the formless, and who could be more indifferent. There was no fixed scale for the differences. It was completely up to Lu Xiaoyu to decide. It sounded unreliable, but that was exactly what everyone wanted. It would give them more opportunities to question and cause trouble. Up until now, they still did not believe that this young Xianyuan swordsman could decide the ownership of Ji-Ma Peninsula. Therefore, even if he was fair, there were countless ways to refute such a method. The sea beasts from the South Sea were the most impatient. They did not like to wait and preferred to fight head-on. The Loach water beast was the first to jump out and shouted, "Let's decide the sword. We, the sea beasts, will go first." They straightened their bodies and stood a few hundred feet away. This was the lowest shooting range of Xuanyuan's external sword in their understanding. They stood there for 2 reasons. First, they were confident in their own strength. Second, they were disdainful of Xuanyuan's external sword. They respected Xianyuan, but this did not include the middle and low-level swordsmen from Mount Shao. Even the most ignorant cultivator knew that the true elites of Xianyuan were in the 5th ring. Those who stayed in Mount Shao were all losers who did not want to improve themselves. They were not worth mentioning. In the eyes of the sects in the Azure Sky Great World, they had a deep understanding of the strength of the disciples of the top sections. Of course, they could not be compared to the elites of the other sections. However, they were not weak compared to the swordsmen who stayed behind. Moreover, this was a young man who was not even 300 years old. How long could he have formed his aura's core? His cultivation was clearly there. What was there to be afraid of? Lu Xiaoyi's expression was solemn. He was very cautious. He circulated his qi 3 times and his qi filled his 5 meridians. This preparation made the Jin Dan laugh in their hearts. Was he going to use all his strength? Lu Xiaoyi gestured with his hands and shouted, "Sword, come!" His shout was loud and clear, and his sword was bold and powerful. Following the direction of his finger, a flying sword flew out of its case and disappeared, its brilliant radiance flourishing. The Lust Water God spoke disdainfully, but in his heart, he was still fearful of Xuanyuan's reputation. Although they were causing trouble here, they were all prepared to flee at the first sign of trouble. If Xuanyuan was serious, how could he be any better than them? Instantly its body expanded several times and it revealed its true form of the loathsome beast. It wielded an incomparably gigantic pitch-black bone axe and slashed towards the flying sword. In his opinion, with the bone axe in front of him, coupled with his own valiant body, no matter how sharp the flying sword was, it would at most cause a small wound. It wouldn't be able to do anything to it. It had the pure thought of a sea beast. It knew that there were only 3 parties fighting for the Jima Peninsula, and they were only here to make up the numbers. Therefore, it didn't care how good its defense looked. It only wanted to test the power of the swordsman's sword. The swordsman wanted to test it, and it also wanted to know how powerful the Xuanyuan swordsman was. The huge axe swung out and clashed with the flying sword. Zhong Jiao felt his arms tremble slightly. It was impressive that such a small flying sword could cause his arms to tremble slightly when it clashed with his huge bone axe, but that was it. The flying sword was bounced far away and quickly returned. This attack didn't hurt it at all. The Lust Water God laughed loudly and was very pleased. But after being in the human world for so long, it still knew how to speak. Especially when it was in a good mood, it never lacked manners. "The power of Xuanyuan's flying sword has opened my eyes. Good sword! Good sword!" Lu Xiaoyi returned the favor. "South Sea Taoist friend, you were born with divine strength. Seeing you in person is far better than hearing about you." Lu Xiaoyi's attack calmed the hearts of the Jin Dan. His strength was above Yuxing, but there was a limit to it. It was rare for someone his age. It was no wonder that Xuanyuan would send him. It seemed like he was also a small elite. But that was it. In their eyes, this kind of sword technique was far from enough to deal with them. If it was coupled with his rich battle experience, this swordsman was just SOSO. Next was the sea beasts. Their impatient tempers were the same, but perhaps they were doing it on purpose to express something? The antlerfish and the cuttlefish came up one after another. But with the experience of the Lust Water beast before, their strength was originally similar. How difficult was it to block the flying sword? On the contrary, because of the experience gained, it became easier to deal with them. After the sea beasts settled their swords, it was time to talk about the human cultivators. Compared to the sea beasts, they were much more hypocritical. Because they knew the strength of this swordsman, everyone was very relaxed. But to humans, they always subconsciously wanted to put themselves last, to plan before acting. After this round of wrangling, the body cultivators could not win against the Dharma cultivators. They were not as thick-skinned as them, nor were they as eloquent as them. Finally, it was Zhong Jiao who stood out. "Then, let us, the Lone Mountain sect, experience the sword technique of Xuanyuan's disciple." Zhong Jiao led the way and stood where the sea beasts once stood. In the cultivation world, humans were stronger than demons at the same level. Even demons dared to stand so close to them. How could humans be inferior? Although he knew that the flying sword could not hurt him, Zhong Jiao's defense was not weak. This was the self-restraint of an outstanding cultivator. He would not put himself in danger just because he underestimated his opponent, even if he was facing an opponent who was not as good as himself. The flying sword followed him. Zhong Jiao exhaled and a series of vacuum explosions appeared on the flying sword's trajectory. This was Zhong Jiao's supernatural power, space speed trap. It used a series of small space collapses to block the opponent's attack, causing the opponent's attack to continuously enter and exit space to consume energy. It was especially effective against physical attacks. Because it was like a child blowing out soap bubbles, some people made fun of this supernatural power and called it bubble dragons. Zhong Jiao's strength was indeed impressive. His supernatural power was also very effective. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword did not even pass through all the bubble dragons before it had to be recalled due to lack of energy. If this continued, the flying sword would probably lose control. Zhong Jiao did not say anything and retreated back into the crowd. The hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators from various sects cheered unconsciously. The ice guest and a few other Xianyuan swordsmen felt a little embarrassed. Although there was no clear winner, the things contained within made them feel very awkward. Ice Frost had a straightforward temper and said softly, "Instead of being humiliated like this, why don't we fight with all our might like Senior Uncle Yu Xing?" The glory of Xianyuan was not here, they were just using brats to show off. Next was Jia Kong. He did not have the same temper as his senior, Zhong Jiao. Facing such an opponent, there was no need to use his Dharma power. Even if he was being careful, he did not need to be so cautious. He did not use his Dharma power and stood proudly. He looked at his opponent and raised his hand in invitation. It was still the same flying sword. It was still the same speed. It was still overflowing with brilliance. It was flashy but not practical. Jia Kang's defensive supernatural power was the art of horn. It was the materialization of the horn on his forehead, forming a sharp horn. It was shaped like a dawu, but it was much longer than a dawu's horn. It extended to a length of 1,000 feet. Even a small mountain would be penetrated by his sharp horn. It was actually a supernatural power that was both offensive and defensive. The horn was very mysterious. Even a sharp object the size of a needle tip could not escape from it. Just like this time, the tip of the horn accurately found the tip of the sword. In terms of size, it was like the tip of a needle against the corner of a dawu. Was there any need to say the result? Chapter 573. When the two swords collided, Jia Kang immediately felt that something was wrong. It was as if a steel needle was drilling straight into his body. Even with the hardness of his skin, he was completely unable to resist the speed of the flying sword. It was as if the sword was not drilling into his skin, but into his tofu. He knew that this was because the flying sword itself contained an extremely powerful force. He could not understand why the flying sword was like a silver spear to others, but to him, it was like a diamond. He only knew that if he did not retract his horn, his divine ability would be wasted. At this point, he still did not realize that his life was about to end. He immediately gave up on his divine ability and retracted his horn, intending to use another divine ability to resist. How could he have known that the flying sword would follow him like a shadow, following the retraction of his horn? What was 1,000 feet to a flying sword? It was basically the final distance that had been decided. How could he possibly react to it? At this moment, Jia Kang seemed to have woken up from a dream. How could he activate his Dharma idol again? As soon as the sword entered his body, the sword aura immediately exploded. The tyrannical sword aura tore Jia Kang's body into pieces, leaving not a single piece of flesh intact. This sudden change made everyone present, not only the hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators below, but also the dozens of Jin Dan in the sky, completely unable to react. When the director saw the retraction of his horn, he knew that it was not good, but he only had time to shout, "Junior brother!" As the blood scattered, Lu Xiaoyi also turned pale with fright, hurriedly saying, "Accidental injury! Accidental injury! How could this be? Why did this fellow Taoist retract his horn? I didn't even have time to retract my flying sword." Qianli was furious. He did it on purpose. He was about to rush out. But the director pulled him back. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. As the senior brother, the director had to be responsible for the actions of the three of them. The current Suan Yuan may indeed be in the middle to low level, with limited strength, but this was not the truth. It was the tiger taking a nap. If all of their actions followed the rules, then this tiger would not have woken up. But once they stepped out of line, even the large Lone Mountain sect would not be enough for him to swallow. Jia Kong stared at Qian Li's shoulder, dead in his eyes. The director's voice was like a nail, piercing into the depths of his junior brother's mind. "It's your turn next. Remember your duty, only take one strike from him. Just one sword strike. I won't allow you to do anything else. Think about the sect. Think about master and mistress. Think of our home. You can't ruin everything because of a moment of anger. We are cultivators. Life and death were normal. That includes you and me. But we can't drag the sect down." Under the strong suppression of the main horn, Qianli was a Jin Dan cultivator after all. He had a tenacious heart, and knew what was right and wrong. Qianli quickly regained his senses and nodded his head. He did not say anything and leapt into the air. He moved several hundred feet forward from the original distance. It was as if this was the only way to vent the pent-up frustrations in his heart. Glaring angrily, the Dharma idol rapidly transformed into its strongest form. The huge Dharma idol was like a fire, overflowing with violent energy. This was a clear indication of the cultivator's uncontrollable anger. At the same time, flames flickered in Qianli's eyes. This was his best technique, the angry diamond. Some of the Jin Dan cultivators were worried that Qianli would not be able to control his emotions and sent a message to the director to ask. The director shook his head firmly. He believed in his brother. Under Qian Fang's manic appearance, he was actually meticulously calculating. His current form was the strongest glaring diamond form. This was to defend against the sword cultivator's unfathomable sword. If the swordsman had the intention to harm him, as long as he dared to make a second strike, this form would guarantee that he would immediately switch from defense to offense. At that time, if the swordsman broke the rules first, he could not blame his brother for being ruthless. Qianli had another question to consider. It was a crucial question. He was very clear in his heart. In the process of this chaotic battle, the swordsman's death was the work of three people working together to show that they would face difficulties together. One of them was Jia Kong from the Lone Mountain sect? Then, what happened just now, was it a coincidence? Or was it intentional? From the analysis of the sword, there was nothing special about the swordsman's strike. It was exactly the same as the previous flying sword. However, there was a problem with his junior brother Jia Kang's response. He should not have retracted his fang. That was the reason for his failure and death. The sword's momentum was normal, but it drilled into the corner. Was this some kind of special secret technique? He could not tell. The swordsman's strength? The swordsman's goal? Everything had become confusing. He needed to find the truth in the next strike. Was this an accidental mistake, or was it a deliberate murder? The flying sword was still the same as before. It was neither stronger nor weaker. The swordsman was still struggling as if he was drinking milk. Qianli had not even crossed half of the distance of a few hundred feet. The anger in his eyes was almost tangible. It burned the flying sword and turned it into a burning sword. The swordsman was also in a difficult situation. He was probably worried that his flying sword would be damaged. Before Qianli could reach him, he hurriedly retracted his attack and called his flying sword back. However, the anger in his eyes did not stop. It was only when the flying sword was less than 100 feet away from its master that he retracted the anger in his eyes. His defense this time was undoubtedly the best among all of them. It prevented the swordsman's flying sword from getting close to him. Qianli received the sword, but he was still angry. He wanted more, but he couldn't fight back. So he opened his mouth, and the huge Dharma form spat out a mouthful of saliva. It was the size of a wash basin when it landed on the sword cultivator's body. Everyone was shocked. They were afraid that the swordsman would use this opportunity to cause trouble. However, they did not expect the swordsman to be so calm. Seeing the swordsman caressing his flying sword with a pained expression, everyone's suspicion of him weakened. Could it be that it was just an accident? Was it just an accident? Cultivators must be careful. However, they must not be overly cautious. It was easy to say what was appropriate, but when it really came down to it, there was no way to make a decision. Next up were the 3 cultivators from Jijian Temple. Jin Yan looked at senior brother Wei Yan and said softly, "I'll go first, then junior brother Wei Yan. How about senior brother go last?" Among the 3 of them, the one who attacked Yoshing was senior brother Wei Yan. Wei Yan was not pretentious. "That's good. I want to see what this swordsman has up his sleeves. Is he pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger?" Jin Yan and Wei Yan rose into the air one after the other. They were very cautious and used all kinds of defensive methods. They did not underestimate the swordsman just because he ran into a wall in front of Qianli. It was as if they were facing their greatest enemy. They were very clear that if they encountered a true elite swordsman from Xianyuan, no amount of caution would be superfluous. However, the power of the flying sword did not exceed the scope of normal. It was perfectly blocked by their defenses and was extremely easy. It was as if the attack against Jia Kong was purely a coincidence. Jin Yan and Wei Yan came to Wei Yan's side, their expressions full of worry. Wei Yan, on the other hand, gave a relaxed smile. "I don't believe in coincidences. I've never believed in coincidences. Coincidence wouldn't allow that sword to kill Jia Kong, who had attacked Excellence Hang. There must be something we don't know. Even if we did it secretly without leaving any traces. What does that matter? Even if this swordsman came for revenge, does he have the ability to kill me with one sword? As long as I'm not as careless as Jia Kong, it's just one sword. I'll just treat it as a life and death battle with an opponent. In Qing Kong, the number of cultivators who can kill me with one strike can be counted on one hand, and that does not include this person. So why worry? Act like that woman." Chapter 574. Wei Yan's mentality was actually the mentality of most of the Jingdan cultivators. They were not childish people, and they all knew that there was something fishy going on. But no one would believe that they could not block this swordsman's sword with all their might. Other than that idiot Jia Kong, they did not even activate their Dharma powers and fell for this swordsman's sinister move. The answer to all the mysteries lay in Wei Yan's sword. The few Xianyuan Foundation establishment swordsmen below were getting more and more confused as they watched. It was a little embarrassing to call him Uncle Master, but he had also killed one of them. It didn't seem right to say that Martial Uncle was invincible. Most of the time, his sword was like scratching an itch for others. Bing Shuang asked, "What do you think will be the result of Uncle Master's sword this time?" No one could answer. This was already beyond their capabilities. They did not have an accurate understanding of the abilities of those Jingdan cultivators in the sky, so they could only make wild guesses. Bing Ke, on the other hand, had some intuition. Could it be that Uncle Master killed the person who attacked Master? If they were involved in the attack, Uncle Master would kill them. If they were not, would he let them go? A few of them felt that this was very possible, but the problem was that they did not know who was the one who harmed Excellent Xing. At that time, the sky was filled with the radiance of spells. How could they distinguish clearly? Bing Ke looked forward to it. "I don't know if this Uncle Master has a disciple, I think." Beside him, Bing Shuang covered his mouth. "Senior brother! Ancestor! Can't you stop adding to the mess? According to your way of apprenticeship, sooner or later, all the outstanding seniors in Xianyuan will be killed by you." Bing Ke was very dissatisfied. "I am the Bing Ke sword. Am I so unlucky?" Wei Yan slowly rose into the sky. He was relaxed, and his defenses were activated. Spiritual weapons circled around him, and a soul essence beast was lying on top of his head. He was really treating this sword as a matter of life and death. The swordsman's flying sword was very strange. Its power was average, but it could be used in various mysterious ways. This was the reason why he used his great powers to maintain the soul essence beast. With this soul essence beast, he could ensure that he would not be harmed by any mysterious forces. The swordsman pointed his finger again. This was a necessary action before he attacked. Everyone had seen through it, and remembered it in their hearts. The flying sword flew out. It seemed a little different. It was no longer dazzling, nor was it whistling through the air. Instead, it drew a graceful arc through the air. City Jew plus God. Lu Xiaoyi did not hold back in this attack. When the spell cultivator was defending with all his might, he had to go all out if he wanted to achieve his goal with his insufficient cultivation. At least, he could not hold on his single sword attack. The swordsman's sword, this was power. It was extremely threatening, and it had already reached the great accomplishment stage. Only the most outstanding swordsman could possess such a perfect aura. This guy had really been pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Of course. He immediately realized that he had made a mistake in maintaining the soul essence beast with his great magic power. The swordsman did not have any tricks up his sleeves. He killed Jia Kong with his invincible power. He was a decisive person. He immediately removed the soul essence beast and turned to increase his physical defense. The situation was a bit urgent. The distance was too close and his reaction time was very limited. It might not be enough to mobilize all of his physical defense, but it wouldn't be too far off. He just needed another 2 or 3 breaths of time. But he did not get the time he expected. The flying sword had only flown a few hundred feet when the sound of thunder was heard. The front of the flying sword emitted a white shockwave. This meant that the flying sword had broken through some kind of speed limit, and was still accelerating. Jin Yan was shocked. He screamed, "Senior, dodge!" At this moment, he did not care about the rules. In front of his life, any reaction was reasonable and necessary. But his voice was not as fast as the flying sword. Sword chi thunderous sound. Lu Xiaoyi was now able to achieve this speed on any flying sword. This was also the second realm he had reached in the Sword Dao realm. Wei Yan did not even have a breath's time to react. The wrong position gave him no time to react to the flying sword's speed. His defense was broken like paper. His spirit weapons either missed or were sent flying. There was a big problem with his defense system. The collision-type spirit weapons could not keep up with the flying sword's speed. He should have used the most clumsy shield-type spirit weapon. That would have been the best choice. But now, it was too late to say anything. The flying sword plunged in, completely unreasonable. Then, the sky was filled with blood that was as bright as Jia Kang's. The scene was dead silent. Everyone seemed to have realized something. Lu Xiaoyi did not pretend to be young anymore. He only smiled indifferently. His gaze swept across the Jin Dan in front of him. He asked, "You say, is this an accidental injury?" His sharp eyes made people unable to look at him directly. "This is not an accidental injury. This is a blatant, conscious, and purposeful killing. Just like what you did to Senior Yuxing. So, whether it is an accidental injury or not, it is all fair, isn't it?" Of course it was fair. If it was an accidental injury, then everyone was an accidental injury. There was no need to talk about who was to blame. If it was not an accidental injury, then it was revenge under karma. A life for a life, a debt must be paid. It was righteous. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword returned to its sheath. He pointed with his finger. "I, cigarette butt, am from the 5th ring. Narcissus sect? It's your turn. There is no reason for everyone to be here, but you guys are the only ones who are not involved." Lu Xiaoyi did not want to keep hiding. His sudden appearance could not be hidden at all. At this moment, when Xian Yuan finally revealed his sharp fangs, under 10,000 years of tyranny, no one thought of fighting. The matter was obvious. Xian Yuan had called back the 5th ring elites. How many had come? No idea. What did he want to achieve? No idea. Was he going to cause a storm of blood? They still did not know. If they did not know anything, then what was the point of fighting? The main problem now was how to send this news back to the sect so that they could make the most appropriate response. Taoist Xishui bitterly waved his hand. Narcissus sect will withdraw from the Battle of the Ji-Ma Peninsula. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Withdraw just because you say so? What you did can be written off just because you withdrew? Whoever did it, step forward. I will give you a fair chance to fight. Xishui was about to speak when Xuelang stopped his senior brother. He took a step forward and laughed loudly. I did it. It has nothing to do with the sect. I have long heard that the fifth ring Xianyuan swordsman is the champion of battle. Today I, Xuelang, am honored to experience it. Ignoring his senior brother's advice, he leaped forward, fearlessly approaching the swordsman. Xishui's face was full of tears. He knew that his junior brother wanted to use his death to wash away Xuanyuan's hatred. His junior brother did what he had to do, and as his senior brother, he had to do what he had to do. That was to not interfere. Otherwise, it would become the sect's action. If Xintian Guan's Jinyan Huiyan could do it, and Lone Mountain Sect's chief Jiao Qianli could do it, then why couldn't his Narcissus sect? Chapter 575. The Narcissus sect and the Surging Waves Pavilion behind them had a similar orthodoxy. They were both proficient in the power of water. The ability to control water was a technique that focused on short to medium-range attacks. The longer the distance from the opponent, the less surprise it would have. When facing a long-range opponent like the swordsman, it would be easy for them to be beaten up. Therefore, Xuelang's forward charge was not only because he didn't want to drag the Narcissus sect disciples into it, but also because he wanted to display the characteristics of his own technique. He was already prepared to die. If he was targeted by the reinforcements from Xuanyuan's fifth ring, there would be no guarantee of his sect's safety in the northern region in the future. He might as well take a gamble today and let everyone see the true level of this swordsman's strength. It would also allow them to formulate a corresponding strategy for the future. Although it was a mid-sized sect, the decisiveness of the cultivators in the sect was still praised. In Azure Sky, the cultivators' abilities were not inferior just because they didn't have the complicated competitive environment of the fifth ring. In the entire process of setting the swords, this was the only time they truly engaged in close combat. It was no longer a passive defense, but an active attack. Only then could they truly measure the difference in strength. Even if you're an elite from the fifth ring, you can't rely on your reputation alone to suppress the Jin Dan of Azure Sky. The change was abnormally sudden. Xuelang's attack was without a trace, and so were the flying swords. How could Lu Shi stop his series of suppression just because he praised his character in the last round? The second strike was unnecessary. He had to kill him in one strike to achieve the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. Only then could he avoid more trouble and more killings in the future. Lu Xiui had been in the Tao for many years. He deeply understood the principle of using killing to stop killing. Now was not the time to be soft-hearted. 7 flying swords instantly flew out of their sheaths and circled around, forming a sword formation. Before Xuelang's water elemental technique could take shape, the 7 flying swords trembled together. One of them swooped down with the power to destroy the heavens and earth. The sky regained its tranquility, as if nothing had ever happened. All that was left was a group of core formation cultivators standing silently for a long time, and the Foundation establishment cultivators below who were absolutely silent. Xuanyuan's ferocious might had wreaked havoc in this region 10,000 years ago, but it had been a long time, and humans were a forgetful race. When the ferocious might reappeared, everything seemed so unreal. In fact, it was just a reenactment of history. Lu Xiaoyi said calmly, I said that I would decide the ownership of the Ji-Ma Peninsula with the sword, and I meant what I said. Therefore, from today onwards, Ji-Ma Peninsula will be under the control of the South Seas beasts. Later on, Xianyuan will send people to contact you and discuss the amount of supply, as well as each other's rights and obligations. Does anyone have any objections to my decision? None of the cultivators from Chronicle Temple, Narcissus Sect, and Lone Mountain Sect spoke. Silence meant silence. There was nothing to be suspicious about. The three sea beasts shook their hands and flew into the air. What kind of joke was this? Who would dare to enter the Jima Peninsula at this time? With Xianyuan the tiger's ferocious might, and the three human forces' unwillingness to cooperate, even if they took down a peninsula all by themselves, they wouldn't be able to produce much, and the sea beasts weren't good at business either. What could they offer as tribute to the tiger that had his appetite aroused? They might even have to pay for the South Sea's treasures. And when they fought, they would have to pay with the lives of the beasts. The lives of the sea beasts were also their lives. The Jean Dan cultivators felt bitter. Their acting had been very successful, but they had messed up the ending. They had tried to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. They had long since lost their ambitions, so how could they be in the mood to stay and chat with others? They couldn't help but leave. The two from Lone Mountain Sect also followed the crowd, but they were stopped by a calm voice. I remember someone spitting at me just now. Is this the courtesy of Lone Mountain Sect? Zhong Jiao stopped abruptly and turned around. Lone Mountain may be a body vein, but it is a human of the Azure Sky Sect. It also knows etiquette. With a wave of his hand, he knocked out the glaring Qianli. Using his Dharma idol, he opened his huge mouth and inhaled deeply. Qianli's saliva, which was as big as a washbasin, was sucked into his mouth along with the surrounding soil. He even chewed and licked his lips. He apologized again. This guy never rinses his mouth. How disgusting! The ground is already clean. Does fellow Yen have any other instructions? Lu Xiaoyi's expression did not change. You are indeed a human of the human race. You know when to advance and when to retreat. I do not have any other requests. I just want to remind you that when the ground is clean, it is difficult to calm your heart. Take care of yourself. The Jean Dan cultivators in all directions disappeared without a trace. The hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators below also dispersed. They came with a bang and left in a hurry. Bingke and a few other Foundation establishment swordsmen stood upright, waiting for their Uncle Master's instructions to teach them a lesson. They had heard too much about the grandeur of the Five Rings and the power struggle of the swordsmen. But these were all too far away from them. How could they experience it personally? Cultivators respected strength. This was the first basic understanding of cultivators after they entered the Tao. But only today did they understand the deeper meaning of this. Strength was prestige. The process. The result. It didn't matter if it was reasonable or not, it didn't matter if you were crafty. Swordsmen were nothing without strength. Even ordinary cultivators with Dharma meridians could play them in the palm of their hands. They did not feel this when they followed Yu Hang. They were used to compromising. But after following Uncle Master Yen for just an hour, their long-extinguished spirit was reignited. A cultivator's life should be like Uncle Master Yen. Only then could they live up to their Tao. Otherwise, how different would they be from insects? Lu Xiaoyi hovered in the air. After the hustle and bustle dissipated, what was left was a sense of emptiness. There were many talents in Qin Kong. Even these few medium-sized sects were all outstanding people. Although they pretended to be arrogant, there was not a trace of satisfaction after they had succeeded. The Record Keeper Temple's shrewd self-discipline, the Narcissus sect's hot-blooded fearlessness, and the Lone Mountain sect's humiliation were all reminding him that things were far from over. He had only temporarily resolved this crisis, but he still knew nothing about the truth behind the matter. More importantly, such a high-pressure method could not be repeated. If he did it a few more times, he would not be solving the problem for Lone Mountain, but increasing the number of potential enemies for Xianyuan. He knew the pros and cons of this, but he still had no idea how to continue. He looked at the few young swordsmen below and sighed. Follow me back to the mountain. Bingke was the eldest senior brother. He was hesitant. Uncle Master, we were ordered to patrol the Jima Peninsula. Returning to the mountain without permission. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Senior brother Yu Hang died in battle. This mission is cancelled. Don't worry about it. He led the way, and the few behind him hurriedly followed. They were in a neat formation, like a flock of ducklings following behind an old mother duck. Although this matter was over, there would definitely be a reaction from the lower-level cultivators. What was the use of these few Foundation establishment swordsmen staying here? It would be a loss for nothing if they were killed off because of a grudge. He could handle the Jin Dan level for the time being, but who could handle the Foundation establishment level? The problem with Qin Kong and Xuanyuan's sword vein was a problem with the system. It was not something he could solve alone. It was really troublesome. Chapter 576. They directly teleported back to Shao Mountain. As for the aftermath of the Jima Peninsula, they could only leave it to Xuanyuan's spies. Lu Xiaoyi might not be able to solve the problem once and for all, but it wouldn't be a problem to keep the situation under control for a few days. He ordered the Foundation building cultivators to return to their cave residences and wait for further arrangements. However, he didn't rush to report. Instead, he hovered in the air and circled around Shao Mountain several times. Compared to the dome, the mountains and rivers here weren't inferior at all. The only drawback was that the atmosphere here was a bit low. It was far less lively than the domed sky, where sword lights crisscrossed the sky and exuded a vigorous vitality. If a cultivation group didn't have this kind of vitality, it would be very detrimental to the growth of cultivators. Everyone wanted to compete, and so did cultivators. An environment of competition was very important. However, he wasn't one of Xuanyuan's higher-ups, so he didn't have the right to make irresponsible remarks about the sex considerations. Perhaps the higher-ups had a more profound intention. His view was still too shallow, so he wouldn't show any doubts in these aspects. It wasn't his duty. What he admired the most was the flying peak. It slowly rotated around Shao Mountain according to a certain pattern. This was the place where the Supremes and Perfected Masters cultivated. He was qualified to go there, but he didn't have the strength to cultivate for a long time. After a while, he went to the Thousand Elegance Peak. Just like the fifth ring, there wasn't much difference between the peaks here. In other words, the fifth ring's domed sky was copied here. He didn't think it was necessary. Wasn't it better to have different names? Shao Mountain was Shao Mountain, and the domed sky was the domed sky. They could never replace each other. When he arrived at the Sword or a Rushing Heaven Pavilion, he had the same feeling. There were too few cultivators here, so it seemed a bit cold and cheerless. Seeing that he was unfamiliar, an old Jin Dan greeted him. Fellow Taoist, Lu Xiaoyi was very reasonable. He knew he came in a hurry, so he was a stranger here. Cigarette butt! Yesterday, I came from the fifth ring and was sent to the South Sea by Master Xiang. Now that I'm back, who should I look for? Or Master Xiang? The Taoist suddenly realized and complained. So it's Junior Marshal Brother Yen. I'm Gu Ting. You're on the roster. I was wondering why I couldn't see you. I thought you went sightseeing. Don't take it to heart. That's just how Sage Xiang is. He doesn't have a plan to use whoever he catches. We're already used to it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Junior brother, I'm new here, so I'm not familiar with the people here. I'm not familiar with the rules and procedures of our sect. Please give me some pointers, senior brother. If I make any mistakes, please forgive me. Gu Ting laughed. Junior brother is too polite. You're young and promising, and you came here with a mission. You're different from us, who are just waiting to die. I'll guide junior apprentice brother on how to settle down. Actually, the rules aren't too different from the Dome. We'll talk about that later. Since junior apprentice brother has completed the mission, you should report back as soon as possible and see what arrangements the Uncle Masters have for you. I'll take you there. If you're like this, you should go directly to Marshal Uncle Nan, who is in charge of Soaring Heaven Pavilion's daily affairs. He's the one in charge, so he has full authority over Qin Kong's matters. Lu Xiaoyi followed him around the Heaven Charge Pavilion. Senior Marshal brother, don't we need to go back to Marshal Uncle Xiang? Gu Ting shook his head and smiled bitterly. Martial Uncle Xian left Qin Kong early this morning and went to the void to gather spiritual opportunity. Where can we find him? Junior apprentice brother, our Shao Mountain is different from the Dome. The Dome is a true pyramid structure. Here, it's a complete mess. There aren't much more enlightened masters than true monarchs. That's why the uncle masters are all secretive dragons. It's hard to meet them. If you have any problems in the future, you can go directly to Martial Uncle Nan. He's in charge of Soaring Heaven Pavilion, so he won't leave easily. Lu Shi nodded and thanked him. Soon, they arrived at a side hall. It was very quiet and simple. Gu Ting instructed, "You can go in. I won't accompany you. When you're done, come find me. I'll show Junior Apprentice Brother the beautiful scenery of Shao Mountain. At the same time, I'll arrange a cave for Junior Apprentice Brother." Inside the side hall, a Taoist was closing his eyes and concentrating. He wasn't cultivating. There was a pile of jade slips by his feet. Obviously, they were all news from the various provinces of Qin Kong. After being selected by Jin Dan, they were here to make a summary. As a Yuanying enlightened master, it was a bit of a waste to do these things. However, someone had to do it. This kind of leadership couldn't be completely thrown to Jin Dan. Jin Dan's level of foresight and the direction of the sect's overall strategy was still lacking. This was a middle-aged cultivator. His face was dignified and slightly serious. The tea is on the table. The wine is in the cabinet. Take it yourself. I want to look at a few more jade slips. Wait a moment. Lu Xiaoyi bowed deeply. He didn't take any of the things he said. He just sat down cross-legged and waited silently. Since Martial Uncle Nan said so, the time wouldn't be short. He just had to wait. After a few moments, Martial Uncle Nan put down the jade slips and looked at him. You don't drink? This is rare among swordsmen. The wine I have here has a good background. Ordinary people don't have the chance to drink it. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously. I drink, but it depends on my mood. Today I came here to learn from Martial Uncle Nan. It's better not to drink. Martial Uncle Nan nodded. Drinking or not drinking wouldn't affect a cultivator's mind. Therefore, drinking wouldn't cause problems. Everyone had their own habits, so it wasn't good to force them. According to the information from the fifth ring, this cigarette but was a true elite of the external sword sect in the Dome Peak. It was said that when he was in the Juji phase, he even crushed the internal sword sect. He was very amazing. He was one of the few Yuanying in the Xianyuan sword sect who didn't go to the fifth ring. He was born and raised here and served Xianyuan all his life. He had never thought of going to the fifth ring to further his studies. For him, his real roots and real studies should be in Qin Kong, in Shao Mountain. What was the Dome Peak? There were a few people with this mentality in Qin Kong. They were the most old-fashioned of the local sections. It was because of them that Shao Mountain's cultivators managed to survive these years even though they were a little nervous. He didn't agree with transferring people from the fifth ring. What couldn't Shao Mountain solve by itself? This was the pride of the people of Qin Kong. Even if a large number of talents were sent to the fifth ring, they could still maintain the dignity of Shao Mountain. This cigarette but didn't seem to be as lazy and slippery as the message said. Instead, he was a very well-behaved person. I don't know how the other side transmitted the message. Or this guy's current appearance is just an act? The reason why he wanted to read the jade slip first was that there was a piece of information from the South Sea. It had a detailed introduction of the dispute over the Jima Peninsula, which made him a little curious. It wasn't because this cigarette but was very strong. It was normal for an elite swordsman from the fifth ring to have outstanding swordsmanship because all the talents were there. What he was curious about was that this guy actually gave the Jima Peninsula to the sea beasts of the South Sea. This didn't conform to Shao Mountain's plan for the future of the South Sea. Chapter 577. When Perfected Xiang gave Lu Xu the task, he did say that he would be free to do as he pleased in the South Sea. This was also Xuanyuan's style. When his disciples were outside, he would try his best not to restrict them. However, this did not mean that a single Jin Dan could decide the ownership of a peninsula. This might be due to the difference in the way Qin Kong and Wu Huan did things. Wu Huan was more bold, while Qin Kong was more disciplined. However, he did not intend to deny this decision, because he knew very well that doing so would create a huge psychological barrier for the cultivators below. It would cause them to be timid, or even deliberately push back. This was not something he wanted to see. Why did you choose the Sea Beast clan? I thought you would choose the Narcissus sect. Lu Xiaoyi said respectfully. The Narcissus sect is backed by the Surging Waves Pavilion. 10,000 years ago, they were in the North region and in the East Sea. This was not something they fought for, but was given to them by Xianyuan. Is there a mistake in my understanding of this part of history? If there is no mistake, they should not have used this method to interfere in the Battle of Jima Peninsula. If they only wanted to preserve their ancestral land, they could have told Xianyuan directly that they did not want to cultivate their power, and only maintained their old home. What's wrong with that? A sect with such a background actually dared to attack my Xuanyuan's disciples in the Battle of the Peninsula. I don't care if it was his personal decision or the sect's decision, I will not tolerate it. I would rather give Jima Peninsula to the Jiwen Temple than the Narcissus sect, because they are not mature enough. Perfected Nan was very interested. This cigarette, but was more interesting than he had imagined. He was not a lunatic who only knew how to kill and cultivate. He had studied the path of growth of the ancestral masters, and finally found that they always had their own unique way of thinking. He believed that this was the most important factor in their success, especially one of the great sword deities. Therefore, he continued to ask, because in this kind of question and answer, he could vaguely trace the way this disciple thought. Your understanding of that part of history is still a little off. You can take some time to look at it in your free time, but the general direction is not bad. Then, why would you rather the Jiwen Temple? Why not the Lone Mountain sect? Isn't a body cultivator easier to master than a spell cultivator? Lu Xiao pouted. It was the first time they met, so it was not good for him to say too much. It would make people think that he was not shrewd and too frivolous. Nanjinren could tell what he was thinking. You don't have to worry. What we say today will not be passed to a third person's ears. I also wanted to know what the middle-level cultivators of the fifth ring thought of Qin Kong, even if it might be one-sided. In Xianyuan goes against one's words. This will help me understand you, and how I will use you in the future. Was he going to be a hired thug and run around the province every day? Or was it because he had his own time to be independent and free as a leader? I'm busy, and you're probably busy too, so we probably don't have much time to get to know each other. So make a choice right now. In front of this shrewd elder, Lu Xiaoyi could not resist the temptation of freedom. I to have my own time and to have independent to himself to myself martial uncle. This is not the case in the Five Rings. Only mediocre people have freedom, and those who are slightly outstanding will be treated like donkeys. Perfected Nan smiled. This is the Blue Sky Mountain, not the Dome of the Five Rings. There is no such thing as subordinates. If you really want to talk about tradition, the tradition of the Shao Mountain is the authentic sword vein. As for the dome, it has already changed. Of course, in that kind of environment, it has to change. But there is one thing, the sword chi of the Shao Mountain sect will not be obedient. We first follow the tradition, then consider the opinions of the Five Rings. So, you have a chance to show yourself, and fight for your future mission in the Shao Mountain. Lu Xiaoyi had to admit that in front of an old man like Perfected Nan, he was an insensible child. Just one sentence from him made him want to take out all his treasures. But it didn't matter. In front of the elders of the sect, there was no need to hide anything, so why bother? He was worried that they would talk too much. But if he looked at it from a different angle, and only treated this old Taoist as an elder, he had to know his place. Even if he came back from the Five Rings, he was just a Jin Dan, not much better than others. Martial uncle, according to the judgment of the sect, The 3 pure ones are behind the knowledge clock temple? And the Lone Mountain sect has the path of Buddhism? In the battle, I found that the Lone Mountain sect's skills indeed have the shadow of Buddhism, so I believe that all these guesses are true. If I have to choose between the 3 pure ones and the filthy Buddhism, I'd rather choose the 3 pure ones. Because the 3 pure ones are easy to deal with? Our Xianyuan has maintained a psychological advantage over the 3 pure ones for tens of thousands of years? Perfected Nan was very curious. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No, the 3 pure ones are not easy to deal with. Even more difficult than Buddhism. But at least we know where their bottom line is. They also know where our taboos are. So we can control them. But Buddhism is different. We don't know what they will do. What will they do? Where are their limits? I'd rather deal with the 3 pure ones, who are powerful but know their limits, than with the seemingly ordinary Buddhism that hides everything behind a veil of mystery. Because they can't be controlled. Perfected Nan was non-committal. But you chose the sea beasts of the South Sea in the end. Lu Xiao laughed. Who asked them to be there at the right time? Since they were instigated to get involved in this muddy water, don't blame Xianyuan for roasting them on the fire. It's much easier than dealing with the 3 pure ones. Perfected Nan laughed, took a pot of wine, and poured 2 cups. I was also called Perfected Wine in Shao Mountain. When I'm old, I like to drink a mouthful, I can't change it. As for your tasks, I'll be in charge, and other trivial matters will be taken care of by others. This old man won't beat around the bush with you. I let people do things based on their ability. The better you do, the easier I'll make it for you. If you procrastinate and don't understand the big picture, I'll turn you back into a busy thug. You don't need me to teach you the difference, do you? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Make the best use of people and things. If I don't live up to expectations, then I deserve to be a thug. I can't blame others. Perfected Nan took a sip and said sadly, in the cultivation world, there are different ways to understand cultivation. In Xianyuan Sword School, there are different ways to understand cultivation. For example, the Domed School focuses on achieving breakthroughs in actual combat. I'm not saying that this method is bad, but no matter how brave and fearless a swordsman is, there will be a limit. The sword vein is also a branch of Taoism. As for cultivation, I always think that it's appropriate to be active and passive. If you're too relaxed, you'll lose the sharpness of the sword vein. If you're too iron-blooded, you'll lose the true meaning of Taoism. It's hard to grasp the propriety, and it depends on yourself. As far as I'm concerned, although the 5-ring sword vein is flourishing, there haven't been any outstanding figures in the past 10,000 years. This might be related to this. Some people say that this is because luck has run out, and the wheel of fortune has turned, but I don't think so. The 5 rings cultivation environment is too radical, and it's lost the most important direction of cultivation, longevity. Alright, I'll stop complaining. For you, cultivation is the foundation, and you can't forget it. Chapter 578. Lu Xiaoyi didn't think it was a complaint. Being relaxed had its own profound concept of cultivation. To put it simply, the Nanjunan believed that the 5th ring sect's way of cultivating talents could produce very qualified swordsman talents below the monarch level. They would have strong fighting strength and could stand on their own wherever they went. But at a higher level, they would lose the possibility to reach a higher level. That was the level of Tao. It wasn't something that could be truly understood by fighting and killing all day long. Tao needed to be cultivated. How to cultivate? Eat, sleep, drink, grow flowers, and be idle. Travel and do nothing. In fact, at the beginning of cultivation in the universe, cultivators were in such a state. Could you say that they were weak? Many of these people now had their own place in the immortal world. It couldn't be said that the way of cultivation of the swordsman in the 5th ring sect was wrong. It also couldn't be said that the way of cultivation of Mount E was conservative. The key was balance. The Nanjunan's seemingly casual complaint hit the weak spot of every cultivator who came back from the 5th ring sect. They all had the same problem. They lived too tirelessly and lived too nervously. Instead, they lost the true meaning of Tao. Lu Xiaoyi also had the same problem. It was just that he didn't realize it. This was because he was limited by his realm. He still had a vague idea of the future and couldn't see it clearly. He only had a rough guess. But the Nanjiman's words made him completely understand. Yes, when he first came to Xianyuan, he lived a cautious life. He was ignorant and didn't know how to improve himself. This was an overly relaxed attitude, which was not good. After 5 years in the Wolf Ridge, he had a sense of responsibility and urgency in his heart. He immediately changed his attitude and forced himself to be like a spinning top. He couldn't hold on for long either. Overall, he lacked a kind of balance, a kind of rhythm that could allow him to perfectly balance between relaxation and nervousness. He could accumulate strength and power in relaxation and quickly get rid of the tense state after a battle. Only in this way could he go further in his cultivation and be more efficient. It was more in line with the essence of cultivation. This was what the Nanjiren emphasized. It was very reasonable. His new abode was on the hidden sword peak. It was very magnanimous and imposing. There was nothing he could do about it. This was the specific situation of Mount E. The land was vast but the population was sparse. He could choose any abode he wanted. According to Gu Ting, his abode was originally the abode of a famous Taoist. Ever since he went to the Fifth Ring, he never came back. Later, he died in a foreign land, and the abode became empty. It had been in use for thousands of years. With the current situation of Mount Shao, every Jin Dan cultivator had an immortal's cave like this without any pressure. Outside the door, one would be able to see the scenery. Looking from a high vantage point, one would be able to see most of the peaks of Mount Shao. It was a first-class house with a mountain view. The daily utensils in the cave residence were all newly purchased, not prepared by Gu Ting. After all, he was a Jin Dan, so he didn't need to fawn over Gu Ting like this. These were all arranged by the guy called Ice Guest, a little Shiji stage cultivator he met in the South Sea. In Mount Shao, this kind of service work could be done without reaching the Shiji stage. There would be strong men waiting for them. Whether they needed it or not, Lu Xiaoyi only needed to say a word. However, this Ice Guest was very attentive. He was very thorough in his work. He arranged everything properly, no matter how big or small. Although he didn't say a word and left after arranging everything, and didn't stay for long to make others feel disgusted, Lu Xiaoyi, who was sharp, still guessed his thoughts at the first moment. Did he want to be apprenticed to another master? With his sensible appearance, it was no wonder that other people were still single. However, he had 2 masters, one before and one after the other. Lu Xiaoyi had never thought of accepting an apprentice. There were many reasons. It wasn't that he was afraid that this guy would bring bad luck to his masters, but that he himself hadn't settled down yet. How could he have the leisure to cultivate a disciple? These days, he was not in a hurry to practice. Instead, he stayed in the peaks of Mount Shao every day. In the beautiful scenery of the snowy mountains, he gradually calmed down his increasingly anxious mood since he reached the bearing essence stage. He told himself that there was nothing to be anxious about. He had just started. He still had 400 to 500 years to squander in the bearing essence stage. He could totally use the method that was suitable for him to practice. He didn't have to live a nervous life like he did in the 5 rings. Although it was very fulfilling, it was easy to explode if it was too full, except for the heaven's will in the morning and evening, the daily swinging of the sword, and the breakthrough of the sword spirit. He rarely practiced swordsmanship or other supplementary skills. Instead, he spent most of his time wandering around and studying the history of Mount Shao. He was suddenly fascinated by history. Because to understand Mount Shao, one must know its past. This place was called the Holy Land of the Sword Vein. What made it so unique? Was it the people here? Or the scenery here? He vaguely felt that if he could understand Mount Shao one day, it would be of great benefit to his practice. Mount Shao was very quiet, which was completely different from the dome. They were 2 different styles. Lu Xiaoyi felt that he could adapt to both. Sometimes he wondered if he would have taken a different path if he had been taken to Qin Kong instead of the dome. There was no difference between good and bad. He could only say that he was lucky. When he needed an intense environment, he was lucky enough to land in the Five Rings. When he needed peace, he came to Qin Kong. But it was more likely that he had the ability to adjust his mentality according to the environment. In any kind of environment, he could find the most suitable thing for himself. There are very few perfected masters here. There are many reasons. Perfected masters are very busy, and there are very few perfected masters. Most importantly, this is not the place to cultivate Jin Dan. Lu Xiaoyi sometimes came to chat with Gu Ting. He was on duty at Soaring Heaven Pavilion, so he had more time. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi asked this question. He had been on Mount Shao for a month, but he had not heard of any perfected master giving a lecture. This was impossible in the dome. Lu Xiaoyi understood what Gu Ting meant. Some of the Jin Dan who stayed here came back from the Five Rings. Just like the 6 senior brothers who came back with him, they could not even form their nascent souls in the Five Rings, let alone return to Qin Kong. There were also some who formed their golden cores in Qin Kong. Among these people, the ambitious ones took the initiative to ask to go to the Five Rings. The ones who stayed behind were the main force trying to break through to the upper realm. Because there were few people, most of them had a master or a more fixed teacher. However, they would not give a public lecture. There were very few people who listened. In fact, not every perfected master was good at giving lectures. There were many people who had knowledge but could not express it. Education also required talent. Some people were suitable for teaching and educating others, while others were suitable for exploring alone. It was not absolute. For example, Lu Xiaoyi could say some nonsense, but it would be difficult for him to teach foundation establishment how to cultivate. But if you really want to learn something, and by that, I mean the kind of inexplicable, crazy, or even nonsense, you might as well go to the old man's peak to take a look. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons there. Of course, I'm talking about their past. There are always some strange ideas that are very interesting. Chapter 579. It wasn't that Lu Xiaoyi couldn't find someone to teach. In Xianyuan, if you made a request, they would definitely arrange it for you. However, the problem was that he didn't know which enlightened master had a similar path as him, so he couldn't be careless about it. In Jindan, they weren't primary school students who had to learn according to the teacher's instructions. Instead, everyone had their own direction and specialties. If you didn't match the teacher, how could you teach them? In this aspect, the Dome of the Five Rings was the most familiar. Cultivators focused on self-study, and then they could choose from different enlightened masters to achieve the best learning results. However, this was based on the fact that there were many enlightened masters in the Five Rings. The Soaring Heaven Pavilion had enough people to arrange enlightened masters in different directions. They covered almost every aspect of the swordsman, saving time for both sides. However, it couldn't be done here. He didn't deliberately want to obtain anything from Zhonglao Peak, but to a group of old people who had struggled their whole lives on the path of Tao, it was necessary to show proper respect. In any case, he was very relaxed right now and had time to arrange his own pace of life. Stepping onto Zhonglao Peak, to show respect, he didn't choose to fly. Instead, he climbed the mountain with his feet on the ground. The scenery of Zhonglao Peak was very ordinary among the 13 peaks of Shao Mountain. All of its characteristics could be described with one word: ordinary. However, it was precisely this kind of ordinariness that suited the mood of the old people. Most of the old people who lived on Zhonglao Peak were Yuanying, and very few were Jin Dan. Although Zhonglao Peak didn't have such a rule that one had to be at a certain realm to enter, when most of the people were Jin Dan, an old man of Yuanying would feel embarrassed to enter. For Jin Dan cultivators, their age was limited after all. Most of the mortal families were under their care, so returning to their families was the choice of many people. Even if they didn't have a family, it was still possible to establish one themselves. Nascent soul stage cultivators were different. They had a lifespan of thousands of years and could easily wander the universe for hundreds of years. This made it difficult for them to take care of their family. In addition, it was difficult for nascent soul stage cultivators to have children. They had a thorough understanding of the essence of life, so basically no one returned to the mortal world. They would rather spend their last moments in the sect. In the eyes of mortals, there was no such thing as old cultivators. They would either roam the world unhindered, or they would die and reincarnate. But in reality, cultivators would also grow old. The aging of a foundation establishment cultivator would occur at the end of their life due to the loss of their magic power. This process would be very fast, which was often seen in the eyes of mortals. Perhaps they could still fly in the sky today, but the next day they would die. This was because their bodies could not withstand the pressure of losing their magic power. Jean Dan was in a better situation. When their mana and spirit started to decline towards the end of their lives, due to the base of their mana and the solid foundation of their bodies, they often still had more than 10 years left. This was enough time for them to arrange their own affairs and even have the ability to establish a family in the mortal world. When it came to Yuanying, this process became even longer. This was the dividing line for high-level cultivators. The weakening of their mana and spirit had a slow process of decline, and the toughness of their bodies was completely incomparable to that of low-level cultivators. Therefore, they could often persist for more than 10 years, and even live for more than 100 years. During this period, their combat ability would become weaker and weaker with the passing of time. The upper realm was like the moon in the water, ethereal and unattainable. The only thing they could do was to grow flowers and grass, cultivate their body and mind, and in the final stage, understand the meaning of life. The natural death of a true monarch would be even longer. Those who already had a deeper understanding of the realm of Tao would often choose to exile themselves to the universe, drifting in the void or on some desolate planet to end their lives. This was the natural death of cultivators at different realms. Everyone was different, and could not be lumped together. In this place, when facing these old men and women, one did not dare to use one's divine sense to sweep around. One could only walk with one's tail between one's legs and one's head shrunk. This was because the old men here did not turn bad because they were old, but because the bad guys turned old. As they walked past a gentle slope, a loud voice shouted, "Stop! Brat, you stepped on my vase!" Lu Xiaoyi's heart trembled. This was a natural gentle slope, and there were no traces of sowing. It was probably a vase flower, and he stepped on its seed. He hurriedly took a step to the side, and the voice sounded again. "I stepped on another one." Helpless, he could only float up. The voice was still unforgiving. "You're blocking the sunlight. How difficult to serve." Lu Xiaoyi did not lose his temper, and followed the voice to apologize. I'm sorry. I don't know farming, and I've spoiled Senior's sowing." An old man dressed like an old farmer came out from the forest next to him. He was barefoot, and wore a cloth coat, and in his hand, there was a black lump that emitted a foul smell. It was unknown what it was. He glared at him and said, "Brat, what are you doing here instead of doing what you youngsters should do? The atmosphere here is gloomy, and the sun is no longer shining. This is not a place you should be." Lu Xiaoyi bowed to the old man properly, and did not hide anything. These old Yuanying who were on the verge of death might not be at the peak of their magic power and spirit, but their vision, knowledge, and experience were all better than his by a few hundred streets. Exaggerating here would only leave a bad impression, and there would be nothing else. "Brat, cigarette butt from the fifth ring. I've just entered Shao Mountain, and I'm very curious. I've heard that there are wise people gathered at Elder Peak, and I yearn for it. There's no one to preach on Shao Mountain, so I came here to see if I can try my luck and get some wonderful words to dispel the doubts in my heart." The old man waved his hand. "There's no wonderful words. There's no profound meaning. If there was, we wouldn't waste our lives here, eating and waiting for death. Although there aren't many preachers on Shao Mountain, there are other ways. With the Rising Heaven Pavilion's arrangement, there will be a Taoist to dispel your doubts. Brat, you've come to the wrong place. However, Lu Xiaoyi refused. There's no profound meaning, but it's good to have agricultural skills. I've been nervous passing my 5th ring, so of course I have to learn how to cultivate my body and mind here. If Senior has no interest, this brat can go elsewhere. If you need help, this brat can also do something. The old man was disdainful. There were many gold core cultivators who came to the Old Man Peak to seek guidance and fated chances like this. Almost every gold core cultivator on Mount Shao had done this before, but who could actually obtain anything? The swordsman's Tao was hard work, research, and talent. Relying on others' guidance to soar to the heavens was a wrong attitude in itself. Those Jin Dan came here for 10 days to half a month at the shortest, and a year or several years at the longest. In the end, they all knew that their efforts were useless, and retreated in the face of difficulties. Who actually obtained anything? The Tao of these old men who were on the verge of death was not the Tao of young people. It was too gloomy, and they had entered the Tao too deeply. It was not something that cultivators at the level of Jin Dan could understand, and it was easy for them to deviate from the correct path. Thus, on Elder Peak, no one would truly guide these Jin Dan. Chapter 580. Just as he was about to open his mouth to chase him away, he looked at his barren flower field and the slightly thin flower seedlings and changed his mind. I don't need you for watering and fertilizing. I can still move. However, I do lack some fertilizer here. You stepped on my seeds, so it's not too much to leave something behind, right? Such a request was really. Where is it? To be honest, this request was not a big deal. Lu Xi was not a clean freak. Behind the forest. Find a new pit. I'm old and my internal organs are limited. I can't produce too much. I'm not as good as you young people. After Lu Xiao returned to the forest, there were indeed more than 10 shallow pits lined up in a row. They were probably used for composting according to the time. The fermentation rate was different, and there were all kinds of smells mixed together. Some of them were already filled and some were still empty. These were the new pits that the old man had mentioned. Lu Xiao found a new pit at the edge. Just as he was about to squat down, the old man's voice rang out. Pull next to each other. This way, it's easier to determine the time of composting. It's against the rules if you hide so far away. In front of Yuanying, there was no hidden agenda. Even if they were now in a declining period. Lu Xiao did not complain. He changed to another pit and squatted down, using all his strength. He had not eaten much recently, so there was no way to make something out of nothing. Therefore, the quantity was a little low. After composting, he pulled up his pants and walked out of the forest. The old man was beaming with joy. Good, good, good. Young man, you're not bad. You're welcome to come again next time. We don't know each other anything now. Lu Xiao smiled and nodded. It was his first time coming into contact with them, so there was no need to pester them. These old men had strange tempers and were hard to understand. I may come again to disturb Senior in the future. Senior, please don't find me troublesome. He walked over the gentle slope, and the old man's voice came from behind him. Next time, remember to eat more before you come. Especially big fish and meat. You're so young and yet you've only contributed so much. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. He didn't expect that his first contact with these old guys would be a bridge built with feces. The world was strange and funny. Most of the people on Zhonglao Peak had a weird temper like the old man who grew flowers. He didn't care. If they were willing to talk to him, he would talk to them. If they were impatient, he would leave on his own. There was nothing to complain about. When he was in this state, he might not be much better than them. In this way, he had gotten to know these old fellows. The main reason was through old man Huang, the old man who forced him to grow fat. They couldn't be considered friends despite the difference in age, Nor could they be considered old friends at first sight. They just didn't dislike each other, that was all. They were all human sperm. How could it be so easy for others to dig out their hearts? Besides, if he really took it out, would you be able to catch it? Lu Xiaoyi never opened his mouth to ask anything. He didn't expect this. The most important reason he came here was to feel their attitude towards life. They were leisurely, detached, and faintly insistent. He didn't come here every day, but every few days. First, he came to Old Man Huang's place to leave the fertilizer. Then, he went to Fatty Qian's place to see his sculpture. Then, he went around the mountainside to listen to a few old men reciting poems. Then, he climbed up to admire Granny Hua's embroidery, and so on. This process was actually a process of calming his heart. A cultivator calming his heart wasn't just sitting cross-legged and closing his eyes to concentrate. That was a shallow level of meditation. It only meant that he could practice martial arts. True tranquility was a kind of attitude deep in one's soul. Through a pair of calm eyes, one could clearly see the more fundamental things of the cultivation world. This was not something that could be accomplished overnight. It required time, and also this kind of sensibility. Jinren Nan did what he said. He didn't bother him with those trivial matters. In this year, he could live according to his own cultivation rhythm. This made him very satisfied. When his state of mind finally settled down, a new task came. You go to the East Sea to pick up a group of people. Here is their detailed information. Familiarize yourself with it, and set off as soon as possible. Lu Xiaoyi took the jade slip from Jinren Nan. After scanning it with his divine sense, he already knew the general situation. This was a family, the Yin family of the East Sea. Their ancestors were also glorious. 20,000 years ago, they were one of the 17 top sects of the blue sky big world. It was a big sect that focused on alchemy. However, in the historical changes of the blue sky cultivation world, this kind of sect that had a foothold in alchemy but didn't have the ability to fight gradually declined like most sections. Especially in the thousands of years when the blue sky spiritual opportunity collapsed, they suffered a heavy blow. The spiritual plants, spiritual grass, and spiritual beasts disappeared, and the basic materials for alchemy were gone. Orthodoxies like Jinren Nan found it difficult to establish themselves in the cultivation world. Therefore, there was a split. Some families went to the fifth ring to seek refuge, and some stayed in the blue sky big world. When the spiritual opportunity recovered, the power had already collapsed and couldn't return to its heyday. For sects like theirs, their disciples were still very popular. After all, every force needed some alchemists, and they were talents that all forces fought over. Xianyuan had also made a move before, but the disciples of this orthodoxy seemed to be more accepting of the law branch's olive branch, and kept a respectful distance from the sword branch. One of the families was the family that carried the tripod of Jinren Nan. It was called the Yin family. However, it stayed in the East Sea and struggled to survive, trying to recreate its past glory. Their ambition was good, but their strength was lacking. After thousands of years, they experienced a lot of ups and downs. Even if they wanted to revive, they were powerless. Once the trend in the cultivation world was formed, it was very difficult to change. It wasn't something that could be done with hard work, not to mention that they didn't have enough strength. Is this related to Xianyuan? Nan Jinren nodded. She's the wife of an earth-shaking figure in Xianyuan. Tens of thousands of years ago, they had a good relationship with Xianyuan. At that time, we relied on them for a lot of medicinal pills. Ever since the clear sky spiritual opportunity was restored, we returned the old land of the Eastern Sea's reverence Yellow True sect to them. We even chased away the overlord of the Eastern Sea, the Jade Clear sect, just to give them a safe space to develop. It's a pity that mud can't support a wall. They can't defend their business, and they can't even start a business. If it weren't for my Xuanyuan's secret support, even the revered Yellow Sect's old nest, the 1000G Valley, would have been taken away long ago. But he had bitterly held on until now, and it was difficult to continue. The Yin clan has failed to live up to our expectations, And our Mount E is also in an awkward situation right now. It's not good to expand our business too much. Even the northern region is somewhat powerless to defend, and vile people are spying on us, not to mention the clan, who is far away in the eastern sea. This time, it's the clan who took the initiative to send a letter, asking for the northern region's protection. They no longer insist on their dream of reviving Mount E, which they have persisted for tens of thousands of years. I'm sending you to bring them back as safely as possible. This is a matter of the domain, and it's not good for Yuanying to intervene. There's a force that can stop them? Lu Xiaoyi was very sensitive. Nanjunan sighed. For an orthodoxy like the revered Yellow True sect, the most valuable thing is these cultivators who know how to refine pills. The rest is not worth mentioning. If they want to close their business, of course, it will attract countless spying eyes. Who doesn't want to have a few more mature pill refiners in their own sect? Those are all piled up with resources, so how can they leave so easily? Of course, it's difficult. If it's not difficult, why would I send you? Just send someone. Chapter 581. Lu Xiaoyi asked again. It's a sect after all. There will be a lot of people. I'm afraid one person won't be able to take care of all of them. Jinren Nan explained. It's actually a small sect with a few hundred people. Their cultivators aren't as strong as Jin Dan, so they no longer have their glory. Those non-core disciples have already left. Surrounded by strong enemies, they already have a place to return to, so there's no need to care about them. Our Xianyuan never forces people who aren't willing. You're taking the core of Chongwang, the clan. Less than 100 people, that's the number of a flying boat. Of course, you can also choose others to go with you, no matter if it's Foundation Establishment or Jin Dan. Lu Xiaoyi didn't comment. Are they all cultivators? Jinren Nan sneered. Alchemy aristocratic families can't guarantee immortality, but it's easy for them to enter Dao. Qi cultivation is a must, and Foundation Establishment isn't difficult either. Only on Jin Dan, they need to rely on themselves and use elixirs as supplements. Such alchemy can't make their own sect stronger. Don't you think it's strange? Lu Xiaoyi also shook his head. When alchemy reaches a certain level, it can guarantee that the disciples of the clan will definitely sense qi and become qi cultivators. They can also rely on an almost unlimited supply of Foundation Establishment elixirs and other alchemy methods to succeed in Foundation Establishment. In this aspect, it's very different from the hardships of ordinary cultivators. But it's also because of this that the clan can't improve after forming their core by luck. As the saying goes, success or failure is due to alchemy. Heaven is fair. What you got easily will be repaid in the future. The clan's way of repaying was to not have Yuanying for nearly 1,000 years. This is the consequence of taking a shortcut. I've never been to Donghai. Does Marshal Uncle have any suggestions on teleportation or flying boat? Jinren Nan didn't hesitate. Teleportation when you go and flying boat when you come back. The teleportation system of the blue sky world is not affected much after the collapse of the spiritual vigor. But there's a problem with interregional teleportation. All the forces are vigilant against each other, so there are too many people. It would not be a problem if you were to teleport alone, but if you were to bring a group of people in batches, and they were alchemists that the other party was unwilling to let go of, one could imagine how troublesome it would be. All sorts of excuses, all sorts of difficulties, even a clay figurine would be enraged. What's more, I'm a swordsman, so I might as well walk on my own free and easy way. Thinking about it, with so many people on the boat, no one would dare to risk universal condemnation. The sect has prepared a special flying boat for you. It's a half-beast, half-boat, half-big-mouthed heron. It can carry 100 people at a time, and it doesn't need to be controlled directly. It can fly on its own and won't interfere with your battles. It's more suitable, but it's slightly slower. Lu Xiaoyi had no objections. In the end, he confirmed. Does Donghai have any concerns? Or is it that there are no taboos, and the goal is the most important, and you do whatever you want? Reverend Nan said without hesitation. Of course, there are no taboos. I, Xianyuan, want to take back the infamily clansman. Whoever obstructs me has ulterior motives and is my, Xuanyuan's, enemy. What concerns do you have now? However, in Donghai, I, Xianyuan, have spies. I'll hand them over to you later. If you have any difficulties, you can ask them for help. However, you must use them with caution. It's very troublesome to arrange these things. You also know that Mount E is short of manpower right now. It's impossible to invest too much power outside. It's better not to expose yourself. Lu Xiao nodded. Save it. Unless it's absolutely necessary, I won't ask for their help. It's not a spy battle. It's just taking back people. It's a shady business on the surface. Martial uncle, do I have the right to kill the infamily clansmen? Reverend Nan understood what he meant. Even if they were all infamily clansmen, it was inevitable that there would be a mix of good and bad people. In case there was a mix of disloyalty and wanted to keep the clan in Donghai, there would be no time to reason. Therefore, he wanted to cut the Gordian knot with a sharp knife. He didn't think that Lu Xiaoyi was troublesome. To be able to think so carefully in such a short time, he indeed had a unique side. He was very happy that he now had a sharp knife in his hand. Not only was it fast, but it could also judge by itself. This saved him a lot of trouble. In the past, he would personally take the lead to gather a group of Jin Dan to arrange the tasks and see who would go. Now, he only needed to tell one. As long as there is a sign, just deal with it. The severity is up to you. In the future, don't ask this kind of thing. The first core of our Mount E-sect's tasks is the safety of the practitioners. Then, it's the interests of the sect. Then, we'll talk about other things. Is there a time limit? We just need to arrive within the year. We've persisted for tens of thousands of years. There's no reason that we can't do it in a few more days. Lu Xiaoyi made a little preparation, not for the battle. For him, the battle was any time and anywhere. The key was the geographical topography of Donghai, the local customs, the distribution of forces, and the intricate relationship with Xianyuan. He would carefully study these jade slips on the way. Yes, when he decided to go, he would fly instead of teleporting. First, he was not in a hurry. Reverend Nan asked him to complete it within the year. Judging from the distance, with his current speed, it would take no more than 3 months to fly across the sea. There was enough time. For such a task, there was no sudden arrival, and it was not a secret assassination. It was an above-board pickup. Therefore, the difficulty was actually the return journey. Since he would drive the boat back, he must be familiar with the sea conditions, climate characteristics, the habits and speed of the flying boat and the big-mouthed heron. He did not need to be able to control them at will, but he must have a certain degree of tacit understanding. In this way, when there was trouble during the flight, he could go out to fight and the flying of the big-mouthed heron would not affect each other. All these required time, and it was just right for him to use it to cross the sea. The current Lu Shi was no longer the him of the past. He began to be cautious and self-disciplined. He was no longer the little Shiji stage who was controlled by instinct. In the end, he still chose to do the task alone. To a large extent, this was because of the speciality of the big-mouthed heron flying boat. It could fly autonomously. If it was a flying boat that had to be controlled by humans, he would definitely find Jin Dan to go with him because he could not fight and drive the boat at the same time. As for the Shiji stage, forget about it. If he brought them along, he would have to take care of them. It was too troublesome. In the vast sea, a man and a bird were flying through the air. Sometimes they were high in the air, sometimes they were mid-air, sometimes they were flying across the sea surface. The big-mouthed heron was a creature that was most suitable for flying at low altitudes. Flying boats generally did not exceed 2,000 feet in height. Any higher, and its movements would become slower, and its agility would decrease. Relatively speaking, its performance at low altitudes was not bad. After all, it usually relied on catching fish in the sea for a living. However, the coastal sea was different from the distant sea. It could be unbridled in the coastal sea, but the distant sea was full of sea beasts. It was not a hunting ground for the big-mouthed heron. In the end, all its abilities were in its pair of iron claws. They were used to assist in flying, not for fighting. In terms of speed, the big-mouthed heron's full speed was only 30% of his speed. It was indeed somewhat annoying, but it could not be helped. Lu Xiao did not intend to fly like this all the time on the way to the Eastern Sea. After he became familiar with the big-mouthed heron, he would still put it into the beast's soul bag. When a cultivator became familiar with his own speed, it would be difficult for him to tolerate this bird's slowness. Chapter 582. Under the positioning of the stars, Lu Xiaoyi took the shortest shortcut. This was an advantage that other cultivators could not compare to. He and the big-mouthed heron slowly got to know each other during their journey, deepening their impression of each other. Whenever there was a complicated sea situation, Lu Xiaoyi would release the large-mouthed egret. Rainstorms, gales, tsunamis, hurricanes, waves of sea beasts, flocks of birds, and so on. He had to observe the large-mouthed egret in such a complicated environment to determine what situation it could handle alone and what situation he had to help. Lu Xiaoyi had not experienced a real sea in the fifth ring. The air sea region could not be called a sea, but was made up of countless islands of various sizes. Now, he truly understood. It was indeed unpredictable. Looking at the clouds in the morning and facing the storm in the evening, it was completely unpredictable. In such unpredictable circumstances, Lu Xiao used 4.5 months to finally get close to the East Sea. When the coastline appeared in the sky, he recalled the big-mouthed heron and began to carefully admire this region that was said to be the most beautiful and fertile region in the Azure Sky world. There was a joke among the Azure Sky people. The heavenly Tao gave the best region to the people of the East Sea. Later on, it felt that it was unfair to the other regions, so it created the Jade Pure people, the Yellow Reverence people, the Guangling people. Among these three sects, the Jade Pure people had no choice but to move out of the East Sea to the South Sea to accompany the eldest brother of the three Pure people, the Grand Pure people. As for the Guangling sect, it had already fallen apart when the Azure Sky Spiritium dissipated and its whereabouts were unknown. Now, it was the Yellow Reverence sect's turn. The three top sects had either left or scattered in the history of the East Sea. None of them had a good ending. It was a pity that such rich resources were wasted. Lu Xiaoyi straightened his body and made a final positioning of the East Sea to determine which coastline he was on. More than 10,000 years ago, there were three top sects in the East Sea. The Shiyu Mountain in the east was the Jade Pure sect's mountain gate. The 1000G Valley in the west was the Yellow Reverence sect's old nest. The Mogan Lake in the west was the habitat of the Guangling sect. When Yu Qing was forced to leave the sect, Shiyu Mountain became an ownerless treasure land. After the spiritual opportunity was restored, various forces swarmed in, resulting in a chaotic battle. Of course, it was impossible for the Yellow Reverence people to leave the valley to occupy Shiyu Mountain. They were not strong enough and did not have the guts to do so. They were afraid of the revenge of the three pure ones. Most importantly, as a great alchemy sect, the Thousand Chants Valley had one of the best medicinal fields in the entire Blue Sky Empire. The Pavilion of Surging Waves had moved to the Eastern Sea. They were hesitant about where their sect should be located. In terms of spiritual vigor, there was no one in the entire Eastern Sea that could surpass the Jade Mountain. However, they were also worried that if they occupied this place, would they be able to defend it in the future? From this point of view, this orthodoxy was indeed lacking in courage. They were overcautious and overcautious, afraid that the three pure ones would come to settle old scores, purposely making things difficult for him. In addition, the Mogan Lake had water as its neighbor, which was the most suitable characteristic for the Pavilion of Surging Waves. Therefore, they eventually replaced the Guangling sect and became the owner of the Mogan Lake. In the battle for Shiyu Mountain, various forces entered the scene. Some were instigated by the sword vein, some were secretly instigated by the three pure ones, and some were secretly infiltrated by Buddhism. In the end, it was not clear who won. However, in the thousands of years of changes, Shiyu Mountain was gradually controlled by a new force, the Five Elements sect. This was a new force, full of vitality and aggressiveness. It was completely different from the pavilion of surging waves, which was conservative, and the yellow reverence people who were decadent and old. It gradually occupied the right to speak in the Eastern Sea. Lu Xui had always been puzzled. With the yellow reverence sect, a small force that did not even have a Yuanying, how did they survive for thousands of years? The Thousand Chance Valley was a piece of fat meat for any sect. In the Eastern Sea, in terms of fighting strength, there were dozens of forces that were stronger than the yellow reverence people. Why did none of them dare to make a move? After thousands of years, they only dared to use some unconventional means to force the yellow reverence people to leave, but did not dare to take it by force? From the words of the Southern Reverend, some limited secrets were revealed. For example, this Ladian was once the wife clan of an earth-shaking great swordsman in Xianyuan. From what he had said, this great sword cultivator must have passed away. Even if he had passed away, his reputation could ensure that his wife's clan would continue for tens of thousands of years. No one would dare to plot against them while they occupied this precious land. If this person was still alive, wouldn't he be able to do as he pleased in the universe? Who was it? There was no clear answer in the history books of Xianyuan. This was also a very strange thing. Who would not want to worship an ancestor who had a great reputation? However, no one was as Loki as Xianyuan. Or perhaps, there was something that could not be said? His current coastline was located in the east of the Eastern Sea. In other words, he was closer to the Five Elements sect. There was no need for him to take a detour through the sea. He was not here to be a thief. Under the premise that there were few enlightened masters in the region, there was no need to hide. After finding the location of the Valley of Thousands of Chances, he cut diagonally into the coastline. Below him was the beautiful mountains and rivers of the Eastern Sea's Lin province. It was a magnificent scene. The Five Rings mountain range was crude in comparison, and the northern domain was pale in comparison. It was truly a paradise on earth. People who were born here all had a trace of spiritual energy, right? The ancestors of Xianyuan had driven the three pure ones out of here. They were really ruthless. However, before he could go more than 10 miles, someone interrupted his leisurely mood. I am Wei Wuji, a distinguished guest of Xianyuan visiting the Eastern Sea. How could my Five Elements sect not be honored? How should I address you? What's the matter? Do you need the Five Elements sect to guide you? The Eastern Sea was vast and had a long coastline. Even if the Five Elements sect was powerful, it was impossible for Xianyuan to find out that there was a cultivator from Jindan accompanying him as soon as he entered the continent. Needless to say, he must have been exposed in the outer sea. Those small foundation establishment cultivators who were densely packed in the outer sea saw him, and reported the news in advance. When he came to the Eastern Sea this time, he did not think of sneaking around. This was because this was not something that could be done in secret. Instead, because he was sneaking around, he would attract others to sneak around. For a lone traveler like him, in a foreign world, it was more controllable to take the righteous path. Xianyuan Lu Xui. I came to the Eastern Sea to pick up a relative. The guest should follow the host's wishes. If fellow Taoist is free, I have many people to guide you. He did not know what role the Five Elements sect played in this storm of driving away the remnants of Huang Chong. Was it a cold bystander? Or did it play a role in it? Instead of guessing, it was better to pull this person to his side and see more clearly. After all, he had not been in the Azure Sky continent for long. He did not even know the northern domain, let alone the other prefectures. Deference is no substitute for obedience. May I know where you are heading to? Wei Wuji and Dafa could not rashly offend an overlord like Xianyuan, but they also could not let him go. Following closely was the only countermeasure. In terms of the Azure Sky Great World, he was confident that the five elements sect's strength was above that of Xianyuan. However, if top cultivators like perfected and perfected cultivators who were drifting in the universe were included, then it was hard to say. If the five rings were included, then there was no need to compete. The cultivation world never believed in rules. If you offended Xianyuan, would it really talk about rules with you? Therefore, in order to not offend Xianyuan, these sects had to act within the rules. Chapter 583. Thousand Opportunities Valley. Honoring Huang'an. Have you heard of it? Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. Wei Wuji laughed. So that's how it is. Honoring Huang'an has made up their mind to avoid trouble in the northern region. That's good too. There's no need to carry such a huge historical pressure when they're not strong enough. I won't hide it from you. My five elements sect also played a part in this. In the cultivation world, strength is everything, not feelings. After dragging on for so long, it's time to end it. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're really fearless, fellow Taoist Wuji. Aren't you afraid of what Xianyuan will think if he hears it? Wei Wuji sneered. How can you control other people's thoughts? Can't you live because of fear? We abide by the rules. Xianyuan has no intention of establishing himself here. Even if we don't fight for it, someone else will. Don't tell me we're just going to give up a good blessed land to others. Besides, even if I don't fight for it, Xianyuan won't have any thoughts? I'm afraid he'll think that the Five Elements sect is secretly controlling and pushing out a puppet. Since both sides have thoughts, why don't we eat the meat first? When others want it, we'll swallow it if we can beat them. If we can't, we'll spit it out. It's nothing. This person's truth actually made Lu Xiaoyi speechless. Qin Kong's talent was indeed extraordinary. Any one of them was an outstanding person. Outstanding people were born in a blessed land. This was the biggest feeling he had after coming to Qin Kong. I wonder if the Five Elements sect wants to swallow the land? Or people? Or will it swallow both humans and land? Lu Xiaoyi probed while flying. Wei Wuji was still a big mouth. Since we've decided to swallow it, of course we won't let it go. But since Ladian has already found her next target, I'm afraid we won't be able to swallow this person. Lu Xiaoyi said meaningfully. We have to try even if we can't swallow it, right? If it's soft, we'll swallow it. If it's hard, we'll spit it out. Isn't that the truth? Wei Wuji laughed. This is the truth of the cultivation world. It's not just the Five Elements sect. Isn't Xianyuan the same? If a sect wanted to develop and survive, they would have to compete with the world. But if they wanted to survive, they had to compete with the world. Guangling sect and Chonghuang Jingguan are examples. Wei Wuji was very responsible. Along the way, he introduced Lu Xiaoyi to the scenery of the East Sea along the way. Although the two of them knew that they were not on the same page, it did not prevent them from communicating normally. The fight for benefits is in the future, but the friendship between gentlemen is in the present. It's too tiring to live for someone who doesn't belong to my orthodoxy. More than 10 days later, the Thousand Opportunity Valley was faintly visible. What surprised Lu Xiaoyi was that the inside and outside of the valley was peaceful, without the tense atmosphere before a great battle. Of course, it was not a battle between Chonghuang and the other sects, but a battle between the spectators. Wei Wuji knew where his surprise came from, so he explained. The matter with Chonghuang has been dragging on for thousands of years. It should have been resolved long ago, but it has been indecisive all this while, causing everyone to be exhausted. This was not in line with the law of the cultivation world where the strong survived and the weak died. Because there was Xianyuan behind N's back. So no one would be so ruthless. The major powers of the East Sea have been giving this face for thousands of years. If it was an orthodoxy of alchemy, it would have long been reduced to dust. Fellow Taoists, ask yourself, are we very ruthless? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Time can wash away everything. Fellow Taoist, will you go in with me? Wei Wuji shook his head. It's not appropriate for me to go. But before I leave, I have a word of advice. If An decides to leave, my Five Elements sect will not set any barriers. Lu Xue raised his eyebrows. Oh? Not even snatching people? Wei Wuji sneered. Although Chong Huang is unbearable now, they still have hundreds of alchemist disciples. Apart from An, they have already spread their alchemy skills. However, some of the core skills are still in An's hands. This is also the reason why everyone is spying on them. But to my Five Elements sect, alchemy is not a must for the orthodoxy to be passed down. Chong Huang Zhengguan's alchemy skills were amazing. How are they now? Isn't this enough to explain everything? Lu Xue clasped his hands. Brother Wuji is a true cultivator. His body flashed as he flew into the valley. He had a feeling that this mission might be different from what he had imagined. Behind him, Wei Wuji released a spell message without any scruples. It was unknown who he was informing. It seemed that everyone had waited for Chong Huang's boots for a long time. Now, it was time to share the cake. The valley was still quiet, so quiet that it made one's heart weak. There was not a trace of the flourishing vitality of a sect. There was really no need for this kind of power to exist. He did not know where the An's clansmen were hiding, and there was no need to search for them one by one. He only hovered in front of a large hall in Thousand Opportunities Valley, silently standing alone. Behind him, the Four Seasons sect flew out. Along the way, the sword whistled as it circled and whistled in Thousand Opportunities Valley. Following the sword whistling, cultivators of all ages began to gather. There were more than 10 Jin Dan. Most of them were foundation establishment, but there were also a few young people who were still Qi refinement. He did not know what level this kind of power was in the Eastern Sea, but in the northern region, it could not even be considered a medium-sized power. At most, it could barely be considered a leader among the small powers. After waiting for a moment, his divine sense swept out, and there were no longer any cultivators rushing over here. Only then did he descend and cup his hands in greeting. Xianyuan Lu Xiao has come as agreed. I invite the person in charge to come over for a chat. 3 Jin Dan stepped out of the crowd. 2 of them were old men, and 1 was a young woman. One of the old men returned the greeting. This old man is in Chaodong, the head of the An clan. This is in Shuji, the elder of the An clan. Finally, this is in Mingmei, the rising star of our clan. Before he could finish his sentence, a voice came from the crowd below. Whether or not to move to the northern region should be a matter of public opinion, and not decided by a few people. There was an uproar in the crowd. Obviously, this was not a personal opinion. It made the head of the clan, and Chaodong, feel very awkward. This made Lu Xiaoyi feel similarly awkward. He had long seen that since these people gathered, most of them did not have a happy expression on their faces. Instead, most of them had a serious expression. What did this mean? The An clan's dispersal was not external, but internal. This was also the situation he was most worried about. If the An clan was as united as before, then it would be easy for him to decide whether to leave or stay. What he was afraid of was the current situation. The clan was in chaos, and everyone had their own thoughts. This was a great test for his actions. The key point was that the head of the clan, and Chaodong, was there to suppress everyone, but in Shuji and in Mingmei were not there. This meant that the disagreements were not only at the bottom, but also at the top of the An clan. He was a decisive person. He knew that he could not allow this chaos to continue. He had to make his stand clear. The sword whistled loudly, instantly suppressing all the other voices. Lu Xiaoyi turned to An Chaodong. Old clan head, can you allow me to interrupt? And Chaodong was already ridiculously old. Even Lu Xiaoyi could not guess his true age. This was probably the effect of the elixir. However, when a person reached the twilight of his life, his cultivation had waned. It was difficult for him to even control his emotions. Because the clansmen below were not cooperating, he was so angry that his entire body was trembling. He could no longer control the situation. Lu Xiaoyi could only do it himself. Chapter 584. Seeing that everyone was stunned by the sword howl, Lu Xiaoyi tried his best to soften his tone. The Yin clan and our Xianyuan have a long history of friendship. This friendship can even be traced back tens of thousands of years. This is the reason why the Yin clan asked for help from Xianyuan when they were in danger. It is also the reason why Xianyuan came all the way here. We all have one thing in common. We are not willing to give up on this friendship. This is the cornerstone of our current conversation. Regarding this point, no one doubts it, right? Everyone was speechless because they still did not know the true intentions of this Xianyuan swordsman. But friendship is not the only thing. It will also become indifferent with the passage of time. There are other things that are even more important in cultivation. The legacy of the Pilled Tao, the environment of cultivation, the habits of life, and the difficulty of leaving one's homeland. I understand all of these. There is no reason to use a framework from tens of thousands of years ago to tie the Yin clan to Xuanyuan's worship forever. Xianyuan will never kidnap a certain group of people, even if this group is very unique in a certain aspect. Because we have our own uniqueness. Our uniqueness has allowed us to stand in the cultivation world for tens of thousands of years without falling. Stay if you agree, leave if you disagree. This is the principle of Xianyuan. Therefore, I am not here to kidnap everyone to the North region. I am here to talk to everyone about the conditions of the North region. Are you willing to listen? Including in Shuji and in Meimei, the Yin clan clansman nodded. This swordsman's words were very pleasant to the ears. He did not have the overbearing attitude of an overlord sect. He was more like a friend whispering to each other. Only in Chaodong was a little uneasy. He had already lost support in the Yin clan. Now, even his strongest external aid did not support him. What should he do? Lu Xiaoyi continued. The most important thing that our Xianyuan can give everyone is stability. There will be no bullying, no harassment, and no worrying about the future of the orthodoxy. All of these will be done by Xianyuan. You only need to immerse yourselves in your own Tao of pills. There were many other purely technical orthodoxies that had attached themselves to Xianyuan. The most famous one was the orthodoxy of the hibernators. They had submitted themselves to Xianyuan more than 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years later, they were still hibernators and had not been assimilated into swordsmen. Of course, there are many things that we can't give you. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the Yin clan clansmen who were deep in thought. How many could he bring back this time? Our herb fields are far inferior to Thousand Chance valleys. The northern territory is bitterly cold. Our living habits and cultivation environment are also completely different. You all have various opinions, so there must be various reasons. No matter what choice you make, I will respect it. I came here empty-handed, and I can also return empty-handed. Pyrolite Mountain has no requirements for this. But there's one thing I can't tolerate. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were as sharp as a knife as he glanced at the members of the Yin family. Some of you must have been asked by some forces to try to pull the Yin family to their side. Generous conditions? Look around you. If your clansmen have been persuading you to do this and that these days, then they are very likely to be such a person. If a cultivator can't make his own decisions, easily believing the words of others and changing his mind, this is the sorrow of a cultivator. I, Xianyuan, also do not welcome such people. I allow you to make your own choices, but it can only be the result of your own independent thinking, and not be influenced by others. Those with other motives, please conduct yourselves with dignity. I don't want to cause bloodshed between two forces that have been friends for 10,000 years. This is not Xuanyuan's original intention. After Lu Xiaoyi finished speaking, he no longer paid attention to the crowd and turned to support and Chaodong. Old man, let's talk in private. The two of them walked to the main hall behind them, leaving the crowd outside the main hall in their own thoughts. The old patriarch was supported to sit down on the couch in the hall. Lu Xiaoyi said apologetically. Old patriarch, you won't blame me, right? I know what you mean. You want to use force to bring all the clansmen to the northern region. I understand your intentions, but a melon that is forcefully pulled off is not sweet. And Chaodong's old tears flowed down. I've failed to take charge of the clan. I've let Xian Yuan down. Little friend, once you say these words, I'm afraid there won't be many who are willing to follow you back to the northern region. The Eastern Sea is a colorful world. With their realm, they can't guard their state of mind. How many people are willing to go to the northern region to suffer? You're wrong. When it's time to use force, use force. Otherwise, the clan will be carved up. After another 100 years, where will there be an clan? You and I will be the sinners of the clan. There was no right or wrong here. Being greedy for the colorful world was also a kind of life. Expecting everyone to have a Tao heart, especially a cultivator who relied on medicinal pills to have a Tao heart, was an impossible task. Lu Xiaoyi saw this very clearly. A clan that could last for 10,000 years was already a great fortune. There was bound to be a day when it declined and disappeared. No human power could save it, so how could there be a clan that flourished forever? But he couldn't say these words to the old clan head. It was too cruel. If they really went to the northern region, they would still be in a state where they didn't have to worry about survival. With the clan's current momentum, there would be a day when they would return to being ordinary. Instead, if they stayed in the Eastern Sea, there would be the pressure of survival. Perhaps there would be a chance for their luck to change. Who knew? I'm going to the back to rest. I'm old and can't take all of this. The old clan head staggered away to express his dissatisfaction. This made Lu Xiaoyi very emotional. This mission wasn't something that could be solved by one person's ability. He couldn't change the trend of an entire clan. After a while, Xiuji and Mingmei walked into the main hall. It looked like they had already made up their minds. Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything and just waited quietly. And Mingmei hesitated for a moment, but still mustered her courage. Fellow Taoist, we've already decided that the entire clan will stay in the Eastern Sea. Fellow Taoist, we're very sorry to have troubled you and return empty-handed. Lu Xiaoyi acknowledged. There's nothing to be sorry about. The scenery of the Eastern Sea is worth a trip. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi didn't have any reaction, and Mingmei was very puzzled. Fellow Taoist Lu, don't you want to know the reason? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. It has nothing to do with me. I'm just a carriage driver who runs errands. If the guest is on the carriage, the responsibility is mine. If the guest isn't on the carriage, it's not my fault. Of course, if you want to say it, I won't stop you. And Mingmei felt that she still had to explain. The clan has been under heavy pressure for the past 10,000 years. It's not the pressure of the orthodoxy, but the pressure of a certain lady's husband in my clan. He's an earth-shattering figure. Because of him, Xianyuan Sword Sect has never left our clan for the past 10,000 years. Without Xuanyuan's support, we would have fallen apart long ago. This is a backer that any power yearns for. But only when you're truly in it, do you understand that it's not up to you. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. If the ancestors' light is too bright, it might not be a good thing for the younger generation. And Mingmei sighed. Right now, we're just an ordinary cultivation clan. We might only be able to maintain the power of a small sect. Maybe there's a future, maybe there isn't. But this is our path. We don't want to live under the shadow of others, even if it's the shadow of an immortal. This makes our lives very difficult. We're shouldering too much. This time, staying in the Eastern Sea was a joint decision of all our clansmen. We won't join any sect. If the heavens want us to perish, then so be it. We want to know, if we don't have Xuanyuan's support, can we survive? If we can, the clan might rise again one day. If we can't, this kind of cultivation clan isn't suitable to continue staying in the cultivation world. We can also survive as a mortal clan. Chapter 585. Lu Xiaoyi decided to leave. Could this be a family without great ambitions? Or could it be a family with its own thoughts? The sun would be very warm on the body, but the premise was that there was a sufficient distance between them. If they were too close, the Yin clan wanted to get rid of their dependence on their relative, but in the Eastern Sea, they were wearing the name of Xuanyuan's mistress. This was understandable. Just like in the mortal world, if a family had a high position, there would be relatives who would benefit from it, but there would also be situations that would affect the development of the family. The key was that the Yin clan's background was too big, too old, and too illusory. Time would prove everything. As soon as he walked out of the main hall, he felt that something was wrong. It was not that there was any killing intent against him, but he felt that the atmosphere of Thousand Chance Valley seemed to have changed. His 5 elements ability had just entered the threshold. Because of the fusion of fate in his mind, the changes in nature were different from ordinary people. The changes that appeared now were like a small-scale reversal of the 5 elements? Changing the heaven and earth? He didn't know, but that didn't mean the other gened and cultivators beside him didn't know either. They were born and grew up here, so they were familiar with every blade of grass, every tree, every soil, and every stone in Thousand Chances Valley. They immediately understood where the problem was, and fled in one direction, but no one cared about Lu Xiaoyi who was standing in front of them. Lu Xiaoyi did not know whether to leave or not. He was in a dilemma. Just as he hesitated for a moment, looking at the empty Thousand Chance Valley, he felt that since it was no longer related, it was better to leave. From that direction, a figure flew in. It was in Ming Mei. She was obviously very embarrassed, and the Yin clan's innately beautiful face had an unconcealable urgency. "We have let fellow Lu see a joke. We have just separated, but we have a request. I am really unable to speak. Ancestor has lost his mind and is destroying the 5 elements pivot button in Thousand Chance Valley. We are limited by our abilities and cannot stop him. I ask fellow Taoists to help and give the Yin clan a way out." Lu Xiaoyi did not hesitate. "Lead the way." He could roughly guess the intentions of clan leader in Chaodong. Such a stubborn old man at this age, and at the final stage of his life, when his lifelong wish could not be realized, it was very likely that he would take some extreme measures regardless of everything. For example, since they couldn't protect the Thousand Chance Valley, they would destroy it. This was a very normal way of thinking. Of course, right now, he didn't want to think about what would happen to the remaining Yin clan members if he destroyed the Thousand Chance Valley and ruined its medicinal veins. People who were close to insanity would not consider such a question. And Ming Mei begged him instead of the other cultivators of the East Sea. Firstly, he was the closest to her. Secondly, he was from the North Domain. He wouldn't tell anyone about this. If the Thousand Chance Valley was really destroyed, or even if a part of it was destroyed, the Yin clan would have to face the endless anger of the Eastern Sea's major forces. There was no place for him to stand. He could only flee far away. Wait, this could also be in Chaodong using the most extreme method to force the entire clan to move to the north. He was not crazy, nor had he lost his mind. He was just a stubborn old man trying his best. After 10 breaths of time, the two of them arrived at a small hidden valley. This valley didn't even have a name on the map of the Honorable Yellow Sect. It was the core secret of the Honorable Yellow Sect, and later on, it became the secret of the Yin clan. It was related to the safety of the entire Thousand Chance Valley. It was not the safety of battles, but the safety of the spirit fields that the Tao of Pills relied on the most. If the spirit fields here were the same as the ones outside, would the Thousand Chance Valley still be the Thousand Chance Valley? There was a secret formation in the small valley. It was set up in an ancient and simple manner. Even Lu Xiaoyi, who was not particularly proficient in formations, could tell at a glance that it was actually the most basic 5 elements conversion formation. It had no other functions. The key is the 5 element stone. This is a strange pillar that the Honorable Yellow Sect's meridian opening ancestor brought from the outer space. After tens of thousands of years, this strange pillar has completely fused with the Thousand Chance Valley's earth veins. The array is adjusting the 5 elements transformation array of the Thousand Chance Valley, making it lean towards the earth element. In this process, the array's function is secondary. The 5 elements stone pillar's 5 elements characteristics are the key. What Grandpa Zoo is doing is reversing the 5 elements and reversing them. He is artificially destroying the 5 elements structure inside the strange pillar to achieve the goal of destruction. Once successful, the Thousand Chance Valley will never return to its previous state. What An Chaodong was doing required a long process. Lu Xiaoyu was very puzzled. How did he do it? I don't think that such a wondrous item can be done by just relying on one Jin Dan. Can this thing be completely destroyed? And Ming Mei explained. There is no need to completely destroy it. As long as a part of it is destroyed, the earth element spirit chi in the Thousand Chance Valley will greatly weaken and return to normal. There will no longer be precious spirit plants, and the remaining few will lose their value due to the long growth period. Grandpa Zhu is able to do it because he has the stone core of this 5 elements stone pillar. This is something that every generation of the An clan will hand over to the clan leader for safekeeping. Lu Xiaoyu nodded his head and looked at the array formation again. He was very puzzled. You guys can't stop it yourselves? Even if the old clan leader is still in his prime, he may not be able to stop everyone's rush, right? They are all relatives, how can they bear to do it? And Shuji by the side was very embarrassed. In these 10,000 years, every generation of clan leader has integrated the An clan's bloodline power into the stone core. This is to prevent the stone core from being obtained by outsiders. Without the cooperation of my An clan clansmen, they cannot control the 5 elements stone pillar. This is to prevent outsiders. But this kind of measure has another side effect. If the person who holds the stone core is willing, when he controls the array, he can also prevent the An clan's bloodline cultivators from approaching. This is to prevent internal strife. Lu Xiaoyu was somewhat speechless. Wasn't this too careful and cautious? He had calculated countless times, but he did not expect the clan leader to go crazy. 10 over An clan's Jin Dan walked over together and bowed together. They did not speak, probably because they knew it was not easy to say this. They had just rejected Xian Yuan, and now they were requesting Xian Yuan sincerely. This retribution came really quickly. Lu Xiaoyu did not have the intention to kick them when they were down. If they did not want to help, he should not have come. Since he came and helped, there was no need to take advantage of them verbally. The human heart was tender and the easiest to hurt, there was no need to. Just as he was about to step forward, and Ming Mei by the side could not hold it in any longer. Her clansmen did not want to say it, but she had to. Even if it was embarrassing, in front of family, she still could not stand by and watch. Fellow Taoist Lu, unless there is no other choice, please do not harm Grandpa Zhu. We all know that he is suffering in his heart. But in this kind of choice that concerns the entire clan's future, we cannot go along with his wishes. He does not have many days left, but we, our next generation, still have endless time. Lu Xiaoyu sighed. He hated this kind of family matters the most. If it was not resolved clearly, there would be people blaming you. If it was resolved, there would still be people blaming you. There was no way to get the best of both worlds. Chapter 586. Lu Xiaoyu wasn't sure if his flying sword could reach the old patriarch at such a distance because he didn't know the true use of the formation. However, he was sure that the flying sword was his last resort. He didn't want to use it on an old man who had been abandoned by his friends and family. He didn't have any good ideas. He could only rely on his mouth and see if the old man would listen or not. Thus, he spread his hands and slowly walked towards the old patriarch. It was time to test his mouth. The only thing he could rely on was the old man's respect and reliance for Xian Yuan. I'm from the 5th ring. This is my first time in the blue sky continent. Do you know what I feel the most when I come here? It's because of two different philosophies. One is full of vitality, the other is conservative. It's like there are two Xianyuan. One is an old man, and the other is a young man. I was proud of being able to form my gold core in the fifth ring realm because I felt that there were too many restrictions here that would restrict a cultivator's growth. However, as time passed and I stayed in the blue sky realm for a longer period of time, I discovered the meaning of belonging here. The times are different, and the environment is different. There will be different choices. This is the heavenly Tao. Lu Xiaoyi was slowly approaching, and Chao Dong was struggling in his heart. Of course, he knew that this swordsman was here to stop him, just like his juniors. However, he couldn't make a move because his respect for Xianyuan was engraved in his bones. Furthermore, he was destined to be unable to defeat him. He had the ability to deal with his disciples because they were taught by him. However, Xianyuan's swordsman, Lu Xiaoyi, walked to his side and sat down cross-legged as if he was talking to an old man. I won't make a move! Unless you're willing. However, if you're willing to listen, I'd like to share my opinion. He didn't make a move because he didn't know if the stone core under the old man's control had any special self-destruction technique, even if he was very fast. You see, if I bring them all back, would it be a perfect ending? They're all adults and have their own thoughts and ambitions. As a cultivator, this is something that can't be changed. You know very well what kind of influence it will have on cultivation if one's body is in the north region and one's heart is in the East Sea. What was the point of an alchemist who couldn't concentrate on the Tao of alchemy to himself, to the Yin family, and to Xianyuan? Would everything be fine if he dragged them to the northern region? I don't think so, right? There are countless ways to leave, and we'll send people to monitor them. House arrest? Times have changed. Nothing was set in stone, including promises. Just like you, strictly adhering to the ancient rules, this is keeping a promise. Pursuing their own way of cultivation may not necessarily be a betrayal. And Chao Dong was not so easy to persuade. Everything is changing, but experience will not change. They still didn't really understand that pack of wolves. Sooner or later, Madaman would be swallowed whole. But you, Xianyuan, won't, because you have tens of thousands of years of reputation. Isn't it good to endure a moment of grievance and a moment of discomfort to have a stable and sustainable future? Lu Xiaoyi whispered. Senior? How long are you talking about? Hundreds of years? Or thousands of years? To the Yin family, this may be a short time, but to an individual, this is a lifetime. Who would be willing to be a stepping stone for others for a lifetime? Even if it's a relative? What you said could be done to the Yin family 10,000 years ago, because they had a goal, and contributions could be exchanged for results. But now, the cultivators in the family use Jin Dan as the top. Is it possible to make them use their entire lives to exchange for it? Seeing the old man's hand movements show signs of slowing down, Lu Xiaoyi struck while the iron was hot. What you're doing now is cutting off their path of retreat. Without the spirit fields, the people of the Eastern Sea will shout at the Yin family. Because in the eyes of the people of the Eastern Sea, Thousand Chances Valley isn't just the property of the Yin family, but also the commonwealth of the Eastern Sea. Your clansmen will also think that this is a trap set up by you and Xianyuan, forcing them to go to the northern region. How can there be any trust left? But I can tell you, even if the Yin family gives up Xuanyuan's protection, in the future when the family is in danger, Xianyuan will not sit idly by. And Chao Dong let out a long sigh and finally put down the stone core in his hand. He was old and had lost his self-control. In a moment of impulse, he made such a reckless move. As far as the result was concerned, he knew better than anyone else. The reason he persisted was that he did not want to show weakness in front of his descendants and relatives. Only an outsider like Lu Xiaoyi could possibly make him feel ashamed. But I still have a condition. The old man's stubbornness made people speechless. Lu Xiaoyi could only brace himself. Please say, as long as it's within the scope of my ability. With his back to the crowd, the old man sneered, There's one thing you're wrong about. Thousand Chances Valley is my Chong Huang Jingguan's Thousand Chances Valley. If the ancestor didn't bring back this strange pillar from the universe, this place would never become the best spirit fields in the azure sky continent. His hand slipped and an identical stone core appeared. This was originally the Chong Huang Jingguan's and my family's biggest secret. But now I can't find a trustworthy clansman, so I can only entrust it to you. There are 2 stone cores. One is the normal 5-element stone core, the other is the strange 5-element stone core. Our patriarch's inheritance has always been using the normal 5-element stone core to show people, plus the power of the bloodline and so on. In fact, it's all to fool people. The real control is in the strange 5-element stone core. This is the secret of the secret. The descendants are unworthy and can't protect the family property. The normal 5-element stone core can't be kept, but as long as the strange 5-element stone core is here, there's a possibility of taking back the Thousand Chances Valley. Today, I entrust it to you, hoping that in the future, when my family rises again, you can return it to them. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior, I'm not afraid of trouble, but I'm running between the azure sky 5 rings and don't know my future. There's no one in your family that you truly trust? The old man shook his head. Who else can I trust? I personally raised them, and even my closest great-granddaughter didn't help me. As for you, there's no such thing as a perfect plan in this world. Arrangements are arrangements, leave the rest to fate. He stuffed the strange stone core and a jade slip into his hands with a mysterious expression. I know you, Xianyuan, are the best at causing trouble. No matter who gets the Thousand Chances Valley in the end, if you believe me, it will definitely be inextricably linked to the 3 pure ones. When the time comes, hold this strange stone core and sneak in through the changes of the 5 elements without anyone noticing. Even enlightened masters and true monarchs won't be able to discover you. This is a secret that my reverence Yellow Sect has already tested. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Why would I sneak in? Why would I not be a good swordsman and come here to be a thief? And Chaodong winked, with a you-know-what-I-mean look. He hated the other sects in the East Sea for not giving his family a chance. He wanted to take revenge but didn't have the ability, so he placed his hopes on this Xianyuan swordsman from afar. Swordsmen were bold and ruthless. There was nothing they didn't dare to do, so it was perfect. Chapter 587. P.S. The holiday is over, and the activity is over. Thank you for your support. The swordsman's performance is not bad because of you. Sloth is also tired. These days he is even worse. His stock has been used up. What can I do? So, I have to rest for a while. From now on, I have to think about the direction of the plot. I wish you all the best in your work. Lu Xiaoyi carefully felt the 5 elements stone pillar. Senior, I'm afraid that your actions just now have damaged this strange stone. Why do I feel that the aura of the Thousand Chance Valley is somewhat disordered? And Chaodong smiled. Do you all think I'm crazy? Angry out of humiliation? Haha, I just want to leave them with such an illusion. If I hand over the Thousand Chance Valley intact, I won't be angry, and the force I take over will be suspicious. So, I must destroy it. If I destroy it too much, it will bring trouble to the family. If I destroy it too little, I will be sorry to the ancestors. So, 30% of it is just right. It is not only within their tolerance, but also relieves the anger in the heart of the old man. They will not be able to return to the prosperous state of the Thousand Chance Valley for hundreds of years. This is one of the reasons. Second, only by destroying part of the 5-element stone pillar, they will have to rely on the family. They have to rely on us to repair it. The 5-element stone pillar has bloodline restrictions, which is prepared for this reason. Third, if I don't do this, will you come? How will I have the chance to entrust it to you? Lu Xiaoyi was completely speechless. This old guy was just acting to deceive everyone. His carefully prepared words were all nonsense. No matter whether he said it or not, the old guy would stop. Now, he even tricked him into making a promise to the family's future. As the saying goes, old people are shrewd. Seeing his unwillingness, the old man comforted him. You also have benefits. This 5-element stone pillar can control the 5 elements of the strange stone pillar. When people are in it, they can fully understand the wonders of the 5 elements. This is something that the 5-element stone pillar can't do. As a cultivator, no matter what orthodoxy, who can break away from the 5 elements cultivation? Especially for Jean Dan, the sooner you understand it, the sooner you will benefit. When you come here you can… Seeing the old man start winking at him again, Lu Xiaoyu was completely defeated. Senior, when you sent the letter to Xian Yuan, you actually hoped that someone would come and help you play dirty tricks. In fact, you also knew that no one would follow me, right? And Qiaodong smiled. It's best if you can take her away. Even if you can't, there will be consequences. We can't let those people take advantage of us. Originally, if you came earlier, I could have set you up with a wife. The women of the Yin clan are famous in Azure Sky for being beautiful and virtuous. Lu Xiaoyu hurriedly waved his hand. Junior's heart belongs to someone, so I shouldn't waste her youth. Senior, before I came, you probably already knew about me, right? This old fellow, he's already so old, yet he's still using the honey trap. What a shameless old man! However, since he was willing to give him such a precious stone core, it seemed like he already knew something. It was impossible that he would trust a Xianyuan swordsman so much. Even if there was no problem with loyalty, there would be a barrier in terms of strength. If it was an ordinary swordsman like Yu Hang, he wouldn't be able to bear such a responsibility. And Qiaodong smiled mysteriously. I have my sources. You're from the 5th ring. You're in the prime of your life, different from the other swordsmen in Sun Mountain. Moreover, although the scene in the South Sea was deliberately concealed, it wasn't airtight. To be honest, I was the one who asked Sun Mountain to send you here. How could a person who was chosen by the 5th ring and sent to Azure Sky to carry out a stable mission be an ordinary person? So, I'll take the bet. Lu Xiaoyu was already too tired to complain. Alright, senior, you win. I wish you a happy old age in the East Sea. The old man shook his head. Thank you, but you shouldn't bless me, you should bless them. As for me, I've damaged the foundation of Chonghuang for tens of thousands of years. Someone has to bear this responsibility. The old man turned around to greet his clansmen. Lu Xiaoyu silently retreated. The old man's choice of leaving was not unexpected. Although they were not familiar with each other, and he was even played around by the old man, this did not mean that he did not respect him. No matter what, he was a competent clan leader. Unfortunately, the situation forced him to do so, and there was nothing he could do. From afar, the old clan leader was explaining something to the younger generation. He solemnly handed over the 5 elements stone core. Lu Xiaoyu touched the real 5 elements stone core in his hand, sighed, and turned to leave. After flying for a short distance, he vaguely felt a fluctuation of spiritual vigor behind him. That was Jean Dan's death. The world was like an illusion. Before he came to the East Sea, he would never have thought that the final result would be like this. After many twists and turns, he returned empty-handed. There was no need for him to worry about the Yin clan. There were countless forces fighting for this place. At the very least, the Yin clan was safe for now. He had to worry about himself. The old clan leader of the Yin clan knew about his background. What about the others? If he was escorting the Yin clan to leave on the large-mouthed heron, it would actually be safer. This was because this was Xuanyuan's mission. If they attacked him, the Yin clan would not be able to return. This would be the confrontation between the sects, and Xianyuan would have a reason to forcefully intervene in the affairs of the East Sea. However, if the Yin clan did not leave and he returned alone, it would not involve the sect's mission. There would be the possibility of learning from each other, and this kind of learning from each other could be fatal. He had to consider this problem. This was the same as in the fifth ring. When you went to other provinces, you had to be mentally prepared to meet the challenges. This probability might not be high, but he would not forget the message that Wei Wuji sent in front of him when he came to the Thousand Chances Valley. He did not know who it was sent to, but the old clan leader said very clearly that among the forces that wanted to get the Thousand Chances Valley, the final winner must be inextricably linked to the Three Pure Ones. The Three Pure Ones are really like lingering spirits. They're everywhere. The Wamei clan had them, the Kun Daoli world had them, the Yue realm had them, the Whirling Star had them, and now they were in the Blue Sky sect. They were really old enemies that could not be shaken off. They not only wanted your life, but also forced you to keep moving forward. When he came out of the Thousand Chances Valley, he found that Wei Wuji was still there. He was smoking alone, but he did not have any intention of coming over to say hello. This was very unreasonable. With his character, at least the character that he showed in the past 10 days, he would not be so indifferent. Especially when the two joked that Wei Wuji would take him to visit the scenery of the East Sea. Lu Xiaoyi knew that something was wrong, but he did not show it at all. He just aimed in the direction of the coastline and swayed. Wei Wuji sighed and expressed his dissatisfaction with the practitioners around him. I still don't understand. Why is the sect like this? Isn't this just asking for trouble? Another practitioner looked serious. Be careful with your words. The things that the higher-ups consider are beyond our reach. Don't think that you are right. Who knew that Xian Yuan would send this cigarette butt? Who knew that there would be 3 Taoist 3 pure ones in the sect? Who knew that they would see your message by chance? This is the will of the heavens. On the ground of the East Sea, the 3 pure ones and Xian Yuan are fighting fiercely. Wei Wuji curled his lips. This is not fair. The 3 pure ones are all old cultivators at the peak of Jin Dan. In the Jin Dan realm, they have hundreds of years of cultivation. How long has that swordsman been in the core formation realm? Childish. In the tens of thousands of years that the 3 pure ones and Xian Yuan have been fighting, has there been any fairness? Chapter 588. Lu Xiaoyi quickly changed his direction after flying dozens of miles towards the coastline. He began to fly inland. If someone intercepted him, they would definitely choose an ambush location between the Thousand Opportunities Valley and the nearest coastline. He would not be so stupid as to bump into them. He realized that Wei Wuji's change in attitude was a warning. This came from a cultivator's cautious intuition. There was only one orthodoxy in the Azure Sky world that could make the most powerful sect in the East Sea only dare to warn him and not stop or help him. Since Wei Wuji dared to privately play tricks and alert him, at least it meant that the Five Elements sect would not participate openly. This was a very reasonable choice. The 3 pure ones' strength was unfathomable, and Xian Yuan was not much worse. The sects under them would not easily choose sides between the two forces, at least not openly. Therefore, they would definitely draw a line between them, and even use some small tricks to win Xuan Yuan's forgiveness. This was why Wei Wuji dared to do this without worrying about being blamed by the sect. Lu Xiaoyi caught a glimpse of this guy blowing out 3 smoke rings. This was the only information he gave. Lu Xiaoyi guessed that the 3 smoke rings probably meant that there were 3 people hunting him. In the vast East Sea and the boundless sky, the strength of 3 people was really limited. If he was deliberately running away, there were countless directions in the sky, and it was impossible to find him. But he did not intend to run away like this. Since he started cultivating, he had never had the experience of fighting with fewer people except in the first battle where he faced 3 cultivators. As a swordsman, although there was no need to fight alone, he could not just run away when such a situation occurred. There would always be a day when he could not run away. What should he do? He just wanted to choose the battlefield himself. This was a principle that would never change. What kind of method would his opponent use to find him? This was also something that he was very interested in. He knew that he had not touched anything else in the Thousand Chance Valley, except for the strange stone core. However, the ability of the law vein was very mysterious, and he did not understand it very well. Lu Xiaoyi only used 70% of his escape technique. He didn't want these guys to lose track of him. The stars had already sensed his current level. The number of stars that had sensed him had already exceeded 1,000. The star composition within his body had formed a true starry sky cloud. This caused his escape technique to start to break away from the scope of ordinary cultivators. After flying for 1,000 li in the depths of the eastern sea continent, Lu Xiaoyi changed directions again. This time, he was still heading for the coastline. The sea was not biased towards the combatants, but it was very important to him as he was alone. Because the sea was like a mirror, he could extend his spiritual sense to the farthest distance. He could detect and judge the intentions of unfamiliar cultivators approaching from the farthest distance. If he was in the East Sea continent, where cultivators frequently appeared, he would have to pay attention to every cultivator that appeared, even if it was just a passerby. He came in a hurry and left in a hurry. What a pity! This humble Taoist is called Xunfeng, and I'm here to meet the experts of Xianyuan. On the coastline, a Taoist was approaching quickly from the side. His sleeves were fluttering in the wind, and he looked elegant and unrestrained. With a shake of his hand, a huge net came flying straight at Lu Xiaoyi. When he first attacked, it was only a few 100 feet in diameter. Facing the storm, it expanded to a diameter of 1,000 feet. It completely blocked Lu Xiaoyi's path forward, forcing him to change directions and delay time. Lu Xiaoyi attacked almost at the same time as him. The Four Seasons drew an arc, brushing past the edge of the huge net, and went straight for the Taoist. At the same time, he changed his direction. It was not suitable for him to barge straight into the soft net-like spiritual tool. This was the basic principle of a cultivator's battle. The huge net chased after him. Although its speed was not fast, it could restrict his movement in a certain direction. Lu Xiaoyi had to be level with the coastline, approaching the side of the Three Pure Ones cultivators. At the same time, the Big Dipper rushed out. He needed to test the stickiness and toughness of this huge net. In the blink of an eye, the Four Seasons attacked a layer of clouds, layer upon layer. This was the famous cloud-generating technique of the Three Pure Ones. Taking the meaning of endless growth, it was easy to pass through, but immediately after, one would fall into the next layer of clouds. It was a defensive spell supported purely by the depth of one's mana. The Taoist's goal was very clear. He was taking advantage of Lu Xiaoyi's weak point of Jin Dan, and his lack of mana and cultivation. On the other hand, he was already standing at the peak of Jin Dan. In terms of mana and cultivation, they could not be mentioned in the same breath. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi was blocked by a single defensive spell of a cultivator since he mastered his swordsmanship. There were many reasons, but the two most important were cultivation and understanding of the 5 elements. Cultivation was the foundation of a cultivator's ability. Swordsmen had always been focusing on explosiveness instead of cultivation. It was not that they did not understand the importance of cultivation, but in the process of cultivation, swordsmen's cultivation would never be able to surpass a cultivator of the same level. They each had their own strengths. When a cultivator of the swordsman converted his most proficient cultivation into defense, he could effectively offset Lu Xiaoyi's strengths in power and swordsmanship by relying on the huge difference between the initial and later stages of Jin Dan. His understanding of the 5 elements was also a problem. The Taoist's knowledge of the 5 elements was obviously stronger than his. He was able to effectively transform the water environment by the sea into endless hazy clouds. This ability was no longer something that Lu Xiaoyi was proficient in, which he could completely penetrate with brute force. This did not mean that Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship was already at a disadvantage. The cloud-generating technique could only block the 4 seasons, and he still had 6 more flying swords like the 4 seasons. The problem was, he had more than one opponent. In his divine sense, there were auras rapidly approaching from both sides. They would not give him a chance to fight alone. He laughed. This was a great opportunity for him to wield his sword. The true sharpening of his swordsmanship was not something that those ordinary people in the South Sea could help him with. He needed these strong people from the three pure ones. His body swayed, seemingly advancing but actually retreating. In an instant, he broke away from gentle breeze's entanglement and rushed out with his sword, crashing into the Taoist flying from the north. The essence of wielding the sword was to change the location after each shot, taking out a sword here and touching it there. He would never fall into a situation where he had to fight one against many. To achieve this, speed was the key. Watch in front, watch in the back. Send out the sword on the left, keep it on the right. Pull out high, dive down, and fight for his life. His opponent would never be able to guess where he would land next, and never be able to guess who he would attack. This was what swordsman was best at, and also what cultivators of the swordsman had the most trouble with. When he was at a disadvantage, Lu Xiaoyi could still run 2 steps into the sea, and the cultivator of the swordsman would have no choice but to follow. However, the 3 cultivators of the swordsman had their own advantages. More people was more important. This meant that Lu Xiaoyi couldn't go all out against one person. He did not have that much time. Moreover, the 3 cultivators of the swordsman were from the same sect, and they cooperated well with each other. When one of them was in danger, the other 2 would definitely come to their aid. When Lu Xiaoyi's heavy sword could not achieve a one-hit kill, there would not be a second or third chance. Having a high cultivation level was also an important factor. When comparing martial arts and techniques, martial arts would always come first. When a cultivator's cultivation level was far above his opponent's, techniques would not be effective. Chapter 589. Lu Xiaoyi, who had the upper hand in this battle, gradually moved the battlefield towards the sea. Even now, he still felt that he had the right to escape. But for the sake of caution, he still moved towards the shallow waters. He didn't believe that Taoist 3 purities had come from so far away just to spar with him. They definitely had a reason to hunt him down. And he, too, had the intention to temper himself. Both sides had put their thoughts together, which was why this battle had been so slow. His sword was untraceable, and he never stayed in one place for more than a breath's time. The magic cultivators couldn't track him down, so they couldn't use their best forbidden techniques, nor could they combine their techniques. As for his chain of sword techniques, if he caught one of them, he'd be attacked by the other 2. That was unless he was willing to take the risk of injuring himself in exchange for a life. Now was far from the time for them to reveal their true intentions. The only thing he was curious about was what Taoist 3 purities would do to keep him here if he chose to escape from the battle. A barrier? A mysterious one? Or a special forbidden technique? This was a battle where everyone was scheming against each other. It seemed intense, but no one was fighting with their lives on the line. The key to the battle wasn't at the beginning, nor was it in the middle. It was at the end, when Lu Xiaoyi wanted to escape. Lu Xiaoyi understood the strategy of the Dharma cultivators very well. The reason they did this was to make full use of their huge advantage in cultivation. If he dared to continue like this, he would be playing right into the hands of the Dharma cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi naturally wouldn't let them do as they wished. Swordsmen loved to fight. They wouldn't intentionally put themselves in unnecessary danger. Since the magic cultivators had chosen time, his response was space. Before coming to the East Sea, he'd passed by a reef region. It had a very special structure, formed by the corpses of the shallow sea emperor oyster, forming a large area that resembled a coral reef. This was a result of the shallow sea emperor oyster's habits. There was something there that he could use to mess things up. In the coastal waters of the East China Sea, there were countless such and such regional reefs. Some were formed by rocks, while others were formed by various species of shellfish. It was easy to distinguish them from one's line of sight. They were light green, and dark green. Looking down from the sky, they looked like pearls embedded in the sea. The reef formed by the shallow sea emperor oyster was not conspicuous, but Lu Xiaoyi could still find it with his precise positioning of the stars. This was the battle he had chosen for himself, or it could be said that it was his escape route. In fact, when he was intercepted, he knew that this would be a fierce battle to the death. When he had gone all out, the spell cultivators would have used methods to restrict his movements. The outcome was hard to predict. Every spell cultivator had a few hundred years more cultivation experience than him. This was not something that could be smoothed out in a short period of time. Therefore, rather than saying that the spell cultivator was wearing down his magic power, it would be more accurate to say that he was beating the spell cultivator at his own game and bringing the spell cultivator to the battle space that he had chosen. Now, he was still a few dozen miles away from the Emperor Oyster submerged reef. He could start now. He leaped out of the battle circle, and his body flew outwards as he mocked. I'm a guest of the East China Sea, but it's the South Sea people who entertain me. How strange, how strange! The journey is long, and I have to conserve my strength for the journey. I'll take my leave now, there's no need to send me off. Gentle Breeze Taoist sneered. If the three pure ones don't say anything, can you leave? He pointed at Lu Xiaoyi, and he immediately felt the pressure, as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. Just as Lu Xiaoyi thought, the three of them did have the intention of wearing down the swordsman's magic power. The swordsman was known for their explosive power, and no one in the cultivation world could compare to them. Especially when they were forced into a desperate situation, they were even more ferocious. It was not difficult to drag someone down with them, but the question was, who would be willing to be the scapegoat? The three of them were cultivators who came to the Five Elements sect for an exchange. This was a tacit understanding formed between the two sects over thousands of years. When the Five Elements sect was first established, it received a lot of help from the three pure ones. In this regard, the Dharma vein had an innate advantage that the sword vein could not compare to. The news of Wei Wuji arrived at this time, and someone in the Five Elements sect revealed it to the guests. Thus, there was the future. The three pure ones had countless spies in the major provinces, and this was the characteristic of the three pure ones. Their expansion and influence were always silent, and never stopped. In view of the fact that Taoism was spread throughout the cultivation world, their expansion was not as conspicuous as the sword vein and the body vein. By the time you discovered them, their wings were already fully grown. The arrangements in the other provinces were better. Due to the great power of the three pure ones, the landlords often dared not speak out. However, it was different in the north region. As long as there was solid evidence, they would definitely wipe out everything. Thus, it was difficult to establish, and they had to be very careful. The Knowledge Update Temple was the most successful example of the three pure ones in the north region. They were very careful and did not dare to cross the line. Many cultivators in the Knowledge Update Temple did not step out of the north region in their entire lives because they were afraid that Su Anyuan would be suspicious. Or it could be said that although there were suspicions, there was no actual evidence. Wei Yan was a cultivator that the three pure ones thought highly of. When he was building his foundation, he had received guidance from the three of them and could be considered half a teacher. However, he was killed by Su Anyuan's cigarette, but on the Jima Peninsula in the South China Sea. This caused quite a stir among the three pure ones. Thus, after many inquiries, they had a preliminary understanding. This time, they heard that cigarette but had come to the East Sea. How could they let go of such a rare opportunity? However, before they attacked, they knew that the swordsman was difficult to deal with. Thus, even though the three of them surrounded him, they had to exhaust his mana as much as possible. This was the essence of a battle between cultivators. Just like the swordsman's speed, cultivators of the Dharma were best at grinding. Of course, both sides knew each other's characteristics like the back of their hands. Just like how a cultivator of the Dharma would not compete with a swordsman in terms of speed, a swordsman would not compete with a cultivator of the Dharma. His interest had been exhausted, and he felt that there was no need to continue fighting. It was normal for the swordsman to start running. It would be abnormal if he continued to grind. Now, it was time to see who was the real deal. Lu Xiaoyi felt his body sink. He immediately understood that he had been hit by the most effective technique of the Dharma Meridian against agile opponents, Mountain Crush. This was a technique that activated a mysterious force. Wherever the technique was directed, the opponent would feel as if they were carrying a mountain on their back. The mountain wasn't smashed, but it was a directional weight transfer. The higher a cultivator's cultivation was, the more they could carry the weight of the mountain. Through a mysterious connection, the weight of the mountain could be pressed down on the opponent's body. It couldn't be touched or seen, but the weight of the mountain could be felt. Regardless of whether it was in the 5 rings or in the books of Mount E, there were descriptions of this technique and corresponding countermeasures. The simplest and most direct way was to use the mysterious force against the mysterious force to remove the mysterious force of the opponent's mysterious force. However, just like how not every cultivator of the Dharma Meridian had the mysterious ability to cast Mountain Crush, not every swordsman had the mysterious ability to remove the mysterious force of the opponent's mysterious force. There were other non-mysterious methods as well. For example, entering and exiting a space or enchantment with strong enough concealment would naturally cause the mysterious force to disappear. Another example was to use a fake death talisman to deceive the mysterious force. Lu Xiaoyi did not have such a space or enchantment, nor did he know how to fake his death. However, he had the luck-severing flying sword and could directly deal with the mysterious force. However, he did not want to reveal it just yet. Just like how the 3 Taoists wanted to kill him, he wanted to kill them too. Towards those who provoked him, he would not consider any other countermeasures other than death. Chapter 590. Lu Xiaoyi could fly even with a mountain on his back. This was one of the miraculous aspects of the star movement technique. The star movement technique relied on 2 sources of speed. One was the base speed provided by magic power, while the other was the speed of the stars. During the foundation establishment stage, a cultivator's ability to sense and understand the stars was limited, so the base speed was more important than the speed of the stars. But once they reached the Jin Dan stage, their ability to sense the stars would increase, and the 2 sources of speed would become equal. They complemented each other, and it was hard to say which one was more important. At the Yuanying stage, the speed of the stars would be more important than the speed provided by the cultivator's own magic power. Finally, at the True Monarch stage, one's speed would be completely dependent on the speed provided by the stars. It wouldn't have much to do with the cultivator's own magic power. Therefore, to the current Lu Xiaoyi, the source of his speed was the celestial evasion. Therefore, compared to the thousands of stars that he could sense, a mountain was nothing. Let alone a mountain, even if an entire realm pressed down on him, he would still be able to maintain half of the speed provided by the stars. In other words, he could still maintain 60 to 70% of his normal speed. It would be difficult for him to wield his sword, but it wouldn't be so bad that he couldn't even take a single step forward. Hold on! Soothing Breeze was very generous towards his junior apprentice brother. Lian Qing instructed. They were all veterans amongst the Jin Dan cultivators. They had spent hundreds of years cultivating, and given that they were unable to make any further breakthroughs in their cultivation bases, the only thing they could do was to dabble in magical techniques to the extreme. In particular, Daoist 3 purities focused on how to control sword cultivators. The mountain pressure was very powerful, but it wasn't their only method of restriction. When they saw the swordsman use the star movement technique, they had a feeling that the mountain pressure wouldn't be fully effective. The reason why they used it was to test whether the swordsman had a way to deal with the mystery. But from the looks of it, he didn't. No swordsman would be willing to have his speed suppressed for a long period of time. This would bring about unnecessary risks. If he had a similar method of dealing with the mystery, he would have used it instead of hiding it. What was the point of hiding it when they were already at the end? The restrictions would only increase layer by layer. Mountain pressure was just an appetizer. The swordsman's speed slowed down, and the three spellcasters finally had a chance to use their spells. However, they mainly used the low-power instantaneous spells. This was because the swordsman was very cunning. Every time one of them prepared a powerful forbidden spell, he would always be able to escape from the divine senses lock-on. This fellow had 7 flying swords, so there must be some left outside in case he needed to use the heavenly sword ruler. Moreover, because he had a preliminary understanding of the 5 elements, he could more keenly detect the nature of the Dharma cultivator's forbidden arts, as well as the timing to activate them. So slippery! After fighting the 3 spell cultivators on the offensive and on the defensive, his speed was greatly reduced, and he slowly fell into a passive position. However, it was hard to say when this passive position would turn into a losing situation. The more successful things were, the more they had to be on guard against the sword cultivator's last-ditch effort. Gentle Breeze and the other 2 understood this principle. Thus, they advanced step by step, advancing steadily. They didn't expect to finish the job in a single strike. Dafa seized the opportunity when the swordsman was attacking Lian Qing and cast a barrier within its effective range, siege. However, the swordsman's reaction was beyond his expectations. Before the barrier was fully formed, the swordsman led the way with a flying sword and instantly broke through the barrier. They were very familiar with Xuanyuan's martial arts and had studied it for hundreds of years. How could they not know that this was one of the swordsman's brilliant techniques to break through barriers, transfiguration? The swordsman had transfiguration, so it was very difficult for him to be trapped by similar barriers. The reason was simple. No matter how high the Dharma cultivator's cultivation was, it was impossible for him to use a 3-dimensional cage like a barrier to trap the swordsman who had concentrated all his power into one point. However, it was fine. This was just one of the many methods the Dharma cultivators had tried. After flying for a few miles, when the swordsman's attack landed on Dafa, Taoist Lian Qing waved his hand and released his own barrier, Goose Feather Collar. Millions of goose feather-like objects were scattered around the sword cultivators. Unlike the sturdy barrier around the city, the goose feather-like objects took the path of using softness to overcome hardness. Those goose feather-like objects actually had another name, Qianjun leaves. Every Qianjun leaf was refined by a Dharma cultivator and weighed 1,000 pounds. It could also block a Dharma cultivator's divine sense. Although 1,000 pounds was nothing to Jin Dan, it could not overcome the advantage of quantity. The Qianjun leaves did not possess any offensive properties, but they were densely packed together, making it impossible for an opponent to dodge. If he did not move, he would be attacked by the Dharma cultivators. If he moved, he would be stained with a large number of goose feathers, greatly affecting his divine sense and divine sense. This was also the best way to deal with the swordsman's transfiguration. However, the swordsman still managed to escape from the goose feather collar without a single goose feather on him. Unexpected problems arose. It was also a secret technique that Xianyuan was famous for. Gentle Breeze sighed. What a scoundrel! Although he had not formed his gold core for long, his choice of swordsmanship was very comprehensive. He was not in a hurry. No matter, he could take it slow. The longer they dragged it out, the closer they would be to victory. He had been holding back all this time because he knew that no swordsman would die kneeling. The more the swordsman did not explode, the more it meant that he was preparing for a life-and-death struggle. He needed to control the situation at the most crucial moment. 3 peaked Jin Dan cultivators were surrounding a swordsman who had just formed his gold core. If he managed to pull one of them away in the end, he would not be able to face the world. This was the difference in philosophy between the Dharma vein and the sword vein. If the three swordsmen were here, they would only think of how to suppress the Dharma cultivator's ultimate move and use the method of a storm. They would not hold back in this kind of situation. Below Lu Xiaoyi was the dark green Imperial Oyster Reef plate. This was the battlefield he had planned. It was time to begin. The 7 flying swords in the sky gathered together and formed the 7 stars sword formation. After 10 years of continuous surging, the gap between the 7 sword spirits had shrunk infinitely. The further the 4 seasons sword spirit advanced, the harder it was to break through. This gave the other sword spirits a precious opportunity to catch up. There were no longer any sword spirits that were weaker. In time, he estimated that the Big Dipper sword spirit would be the first to surpass the 4 seasons sword spirit. This was the inevitable result of the star technique. Once the sword formation was formed, the attack and defense were balanced. The sky was filled with sword shadows. In an instant, the disadvantage was reversed and there was even a faint hint of suppression. However, at the same time, he could no longer control his sword as if it was flying. The warp sword lineage and the E-sword lineage were contradictory to each other. Both of them could fight against many, but the warp sword lineage relied on speed, while the E-sword lineage relied on the sword formation. 2 directions. He hadn't used the sword array all this time because he knew that his sword array could easily deal with one of the 3. However, if the 3 of them worked together, and they were of the same origin, their cooperation would be perfect. It would be very difficult for him to achieve his goal. Therefore, he needed to add a backup plan for himself. Even if he failed, he would have a chance to turn the tables. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.